I decided it's a workshop. We don't need a gavel. But we have this workshop scheduled in order to discuss board policies. I know in the comments that were provided for the survey, there was also wanting to be conversation about linkages. So really, what I think is going to be the best for us to ensure that we use our time wisely is to first maybe ask the question of, like, are there specific policies that we want to discuss? I know linkages is at a high mark, so I just want to see, like, how many policies, but maybe linkages would be a good place to start the conversation. But are there specific policies board members had in mind that we want to maybe have more of a conversation about?
I only had one.
Okay. Well, and I have one, but it's a bylaw, not a policy, but it still falls within the same purview.
I didn't have specific policies that I, wanted to bring into question for any reason
Sure.
or things like that. As far as I remember, the earlier conversations about doing this workshop.
Yep.
Part of the goal was to like give us as a group a chance to kind of get a sense of how they work together.
Yep.
Because I remember in my first year, one of the things that would happen is just getting that facility with, a question comes up in one of our informational sessions or something, right?
Yep.
And then we don't necessarily know, like, oh, that's actually covered in a different policy, and then how that fits into the work plan.
Sure.
So getting a sense of that bigger picture so that we can, we can see how the information is coming to us in such a way that we can,
Absolutely.
measure it against the policies,
Sure.
I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and in my thought process, I guess, nobody's inside my brain, so that would be helpful. My thought process was also this idea of, like, if there's policies that are questions, that people have questions on, we could use that as a springboard for, like, what is the scope of, say, the governance culture or operational expectations. And then also talk about, like, where are some other policies kind of dovetailing together, so kind of getting to that
Right.
point. So,
There's that nifty
yeah.
graphic I could just review real quick to kind of do
Yes.
like a once over
Yeah.
the world, and then we can drill in from there.
Yep.
Dan, is it okay if I share via the Apple TV?
That's good, I think that's good.
Yeah.
I
And
could
that
start
and that was exactly where I was gonna go, I just didn't have that, so I'm glad that you have that.
You mentioned it, triggered my brain, I found it.
Yeah, there's also the wheel that we usually do
Oh,
during the.
yes, I'll find that too.
Sorry, that's terrible.
Could be worse. I could come up with the worst one if you want.
I'm
We'll
humming
just
on the
launch it.
inside, to be honest with you, so. I need to get something else in my head.
There we go.
There we go. So, yeah, this is a,
Was it not unlocked?
No, it's not
Oh.
unlocked, so.
okay, we will get that unlocked. Thank you
Sorry
for
about
letting us
Sorry,
know.
I should have
Sorry
mentioned
about
that when I badged in, yeah.
Have your thingy.
You
So
just start pounding on it.
This is a graphic that has been used in the past when we talk to people who may be interested in school board service. There's also a wheel that Dr. Engel may share with us as well. But, yeah, I mean, if you want to go ahead and take the first stab at it, and I can add in as well.
So this is a graphic that's been shared with us when we thought about coherent governance, and it's very similar to how policy governance related previously. The idea is that at the top is the owners. Those are the folks that we serve, our community members out in the community. And next is the Board of Education, which is elected by the owners or community members. And the linkages provide that connection between those who own our school district and the Board of Education that provides the oversight for the school district. And then how the Board of Education kind of governs itself is through those governance culture policies, the GC policies. The Board of Education hires the superintendent, it's their one employee, and the board superintendent relationship policies govern that relationship. What to tell the superintendent what to do, where there's independence to do stuff, where there's oversight, how that relationship works. Then, the superintendent is responsible for operational expectations and results, ensuring that the school district is operating the way that the school board expects it to, and that we're meeting the results that the school board expects for our students. And we demonstrate that we're meeting those expectations through monitoring. So those student results policies go back up to the board, and the operational expectations go back up to the board. So those policies all relate to kind of how this works.
And so when we shifted from policy governance to coherent governance, we had a 2 or 3 day workshop where we actually went through and said, these are the expectations of the board. This is what we want to see happen. So when you read for example, the results policies, this is what we expect a student to be able to do when they graduate. With the operational expectations, these are the things that we expect to occur for our school district to function effectively. So we created those. The indicators were created by the administration and with our input in terms of here's what we think would be the evidence to show that we are meeting what, we want you to see, school board. Like if you're saying this, here's the evidence. And then we can have that conversation about, maybe we can modify that, or no, that's not getting at what we exactly are expecting. So maybe take another stab at giving us some indicators about what we want. And we've had those conversations even in this past year about, we think we expected this because we are not the same board that was here in 2018, but the school district administration provided evidence that maybe a previous board wanted, but this board is looking for more. So that is the give and take that happens here, and that's the give and take we expect during our conversations and operational expectations and results. As I think I've said before, if this board feels that our policy language is not in alignment with what we believe as a board, then we need to have a conversation about making sure the policies do reflect what we expect. The board superintendent relationship one is a really good example of one where we as a board need to determine where's the bright line, so that what work belongs to the superintendent versus what work belongs to us. The example that our colleagues gave us when we were being trained on the coherent governance, for example, is the board has all the power, and you defer power to the superintendent and the administration in certain areas if you so choose. So for example, if you want to buy all the paper clips for the entire school district, the board can take that power unto themselves. You can do all of the purchasing you want, or you could say to the superintendent, it's your responsibility, and if you need to hire somebody who has procurement expertise, then do what you need to do, but we expect you to show us the results that we are getting things appropriately on time, we're not behind, et cetera. So that is power we have deferred to the superintendent. We could be the ones who hire everybody in the school district, or we can defer to the superintendent, either you, or if you need to hire a human resources expert, hire somebody to ensure that all of our positions are filled appropriately, that we have a process to ensure those are filled appropriately, that we're following all the laws regarding employment effectively. But again, that's really what that BSR policy, the board superintendent relationship policies, are all about, is defining what we allow the superintendent to do and not do, and then what is the power that is reserved to us so that we're not encroaching either way. It is clear who has responsibility. And then we can hold that person or entity, superintendent or board, accountable for either meeting or not meeting those results that we expected in those policies.
See if I can find that other graphic.
So just so I'm clear, if we're dictating buying the paper clips and stuff, really that's not coherence governance then, correct? Virtually we're one vote away from not having coherence governance. I don't mean one single vote, I just mean like we could end it, right? So where's the fine line where what you're saying is we can take over some of the processes and procedures. However, then do we really have a coherence governance policy, or you know what I mean?
So coherent governance really is the structure, right? So these policies, the way they're written, are the structure of how we expect things to function, right? If you look at other school districts, you might find a policy book that is, policy, binders full. I mean, I remember when I was a union rep in Racine, going into the superintendent's office and seeing about 10 binders full of policies, right? So it's really just, coherent governance is a structure of how you want to function. Some of the things that we do not deal with, for example, we've heard a lot in the news in the last few years about, book banning. So we have delegated responsibility of curriculum to the superintendent. Now, we could take that back if we wanted. We're still functioning under coherent governance if we wanted to take that power back. Or we could say, really, we need to leave some of these decisions to the experts who know more about it. Like, I don't know that I'd be smart enough to choose a sixth grade social studies textbook, right? Or what books could be used at an elementary level that will benefit reading reading scores to go up. Like the New York Times had an article that, all scores are going down with the national test report card. So, I mean, it's that type of stuff. Like, you can, if the school board wants to take that on, they can, or they could pass it on to somebody else and hold them responsible to ensure that student results are being met in the way we intend them to be based upon our results policies. Does that help? Okay.
Yeah, so in 2018, you did spend 3 days. I'm surprised you did that quickly, to be honest with you. But I will say, comparing what was in place prior to that to what you came up with, it's 85, 90-ish% the same. Might be
Correct.
organized a little differently. So they didn't start with a blank piece of paper.
Correct.
And how they came up with that in 2001 or whenever they started it was, again, a lot of it was from Randy and Linda. So one of the things that I learned since we had our training with Randy and Linda last fall, time flies, because I've struggled with the policy governance that we had in the past was not exactly that we operated with as a board. We called it modified because we tweaked it for the way that it worked for us in our community. So we had that leverage and we had those discussions, some very lively, and we found what worked for us. It was a similar framework. The framework, I think the bones that you hang it on are the same, but how you flesh it out looks a little different. The reason it became coherent governance instead of policy governance, and this is what Linda told me, and now she's retired.
Yes, she retired.
So she said that policy governance was created by John Carver. And John Carver felt very strongly about, and I can't remember which two, there was one about personnel, something, and there was another one that, I can't remember what, something, there were 2 points that were just
Facilities, I think it was.
absolutely sticking with Carver that said, if you do it differently than this, you cannot call it policy governance. So then they created coherent governance. The biggest change I see in coherent governance from what we had in policy governance is the indicator piece. I'm still dancing with that one. I kind of get why it's a good idea. If I were the superintendent, I'd love it because if safety, you want student safety. Well, if I do everything that I think is right and I bring you a report and you go, actually, I thought student safety was this whole other thing. And so you failed and now I'm going to lose my job. So I get why it's important, but I struggle with creating, well, first of all, I think we have so many, I think we're starting to drown in so much data that I wonder if we're
133
paralyzing
indicators.
ourselves in some ways. I kind of wonder if all these indicators are really getting us where we need to be, or if it's becoming overkill. How many administrative hours are spent on these reports of things that may or may not matter to the board is a question I wonder when I see these reports with, you click on this, and you click on this, and you click on this, and you click on this, and. Well, I mean, we don't look at every single one of those in infinite detail, so why are you putting in all that work?
We have 133 key performance indicators, so if you're using like Lean Six Sigma or some other, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot, and so, I think.
That's not Lean Six Sigma then.
That's
No.
not
No,
lean.
it's not lean at all.
Rather portly
There's nothing
Six
lean
Sigma.
with that.
I would love to see a discussion here. One is, some people have privately told me they don't like coherent governance. I'm not ready to throw it out. I'm still, like I said, I'm still dancing with the indicator piece because I also struggle with, so we set this indicator today, and then a year from now, we're like, oh, all these things happen, and if we'd only known then and now, but we could only measure on this, and so I struggle with that sometimes. I feel like, I don't want to penalize staff because they didn't know, but some of it isn't helpful. So,
I do have a question about that, because you were here through policy governance, you got all those reports back, a few years ago. And when I go back and look at some of those reports, there may be a page or 2 pages, it's kind of like an assessment of things at the time, whereas now it might be 20 pages with 1,000 pages of document, links.
Exactly.
So we almost had 2 extremes. One was
Right.
maybe like a little light on
think so, too.
substance, and maybe one is a little heavy on like overwhelming. I'm curious, like, just from your perspective, seeing both of those, like, is there a balance somewhere in the middle?
I
or
think
was-
we could have more balance. I really do, I love data, I love looking at numbers, but I just, having run a large organization myself, not as large as yours, but I'm like, well, all you do is just chase these reports all day. Like, do you really get to do what you signed? Like, why, do you love this? Like, you're an educator, this can't be that much fun every day. So I kind of wonder about that, but we can change it. Like, one of the things I would like a lively discussion on is the way our and this is just an example, I don't want to skew the conversation, but just for illustration, the long-range facility planning. In policy governance, we as a board kind of sat and spent 3 days working on that with staff, and we together came up with it versus just saying the superintendent's in charge of that. Now, maybe the rest of you don't think that, and that's fine, and majority rules, and that's fine. But I hope we can have those kinds of discussions here about, like, what do we hear from the public that they feel we should be doing more of or less of? I just, again, I think there's a lot of indicators that maybe aren't really they're helpful to have, it's nice to show volumes of paper, but are they really showing us we're moving the dial? Are we flapping the bird's wings, or are we showing how far we flew? Which one we're measuring? Off my soapbox, sorry.
Well, no, and I don't disagree with that. I think that, part of coherent governance is ensuring that the administration can prove that they are meeting what we expect, right? And so, again, the beauty of coherent governance is we get to set that. We can say, we don't need this much data, we are comfortable. We can say, this is not within your purview, this is ours. So I think the challenge has always been, does the board, because it's a new board every year, when you think about it, a third of the board gets potentially replaced every single year. Does the board feel comfortable gelling that quickly to come up with what we want to see? Can we gel quickly enough to define as a unit what we want? Because it's not individuals. We are not individuals as a board. We are a team. We are a unit. And so how do we want to define that? So I think what Deb has brought up makes a lot of sense, but it's that question of what do we want and expect, and also measuring that with what does our community expect us to be able to show them that the school district is doing what they are expected to do, or at least what their community believes that they're expected to do. Again, for example, something that came up recently was the removal of the French program, right? I don't know that, me personally as a board member, I think it makes a lot of sense for the school board to determine whether we should be offering French or not, right? Or specific programs like IB or advanced placement. I think that's better suited for the administration who can see at the ground level what's needed. But I can tell you the community definitely wanted the board to make that decision, take it away from the administration. So I think, we also have to measure what makes the most sense. So I totally agree. I think the number of indicators we have may be on the end of excessive, But I also think the idea at the time was, we want to ensure these particular things, because they are important for us to be able to show that the school district is doing the work it's expected to do. So I think that balance is where we need to.
I think that's a
Work.
good point. That, for me, it raises the kind of the example case of, so I think the French program is a really good one, of a decision that, you know, a significant feeling in the community is like, why didn't you guys do this, right? And I think that's a fair perception.
Absolutely.
But when we think about the day-to-day operation and how, you know, we give direction through policy and we insist on accountability through, you know, the reports that we're given, one of the values, I think, of coherent governance or of policy governance, of a structure that is not just you do everything, you know, in whatever way feels right in the moment, which is just, it is constantly reactive, I think, is that it allows us to say, well, here's why I don't feel qualified to be the one to decide about that program. And so we have delegated to professionals in that area who are going to make that decision based on the realities of this. And that frees us up as a board to do a significant amount of other work and to stay at that higher level in looking at the overall shape and direction of the district, which is, to my mind, where a board ought to be, I think. So.
If I could,
Yeah.
and it's very true, but let's say it wasn't French and it was football.
Sure.
Or, you know,
Yeah.
something that, this place would be, I mean, there'd be people
Right.
standing outside. So there has to be some sort of happy medium where we as a board are notified of this, or at least be given an opportunity to talk about the positives, the negatives, you know, and be part of that, knowing, yes, they are the pros, but ultimately, we have to answer for it, and
Yeah.
that's what we were elected for. So I'm learning now that we can change more than I thought we could with coherence governance, which makes me feel better that, you know, if we wanted to, I think what he has to go through for some of these are insane, you know, 133, my goodness, you know. But I also think that there's got to be some sort of happy medium. If we're going to cancel something or no longer offer something, I think we need to be part of that discussion. Not necessarily, you know, but we need to understand why, and we need to be able to support that.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong at all, and I think we have that opportunity now. It just maybe doesn't show up in the way that is like completely natural to what people might expect, right? So let's use that as a thought experiment, right? Aaron decides in the dead of night that we no longer need a football program,
Right.
and he, you know, brings that to us. Would that be on the consent agenda?
It wouldn't be on anything.
It wouldn't be on anything.
No, yeah, we would. So
It'd just be
right,
like
so.
Privacy on the public speaking.
So absolutely, like a situation like that where,
That could be where it
let's
starts.
just use that as the example, right? Where we would all have strong opinions about it, let alone the public, right?
Right.
And about the value of that program. We can step in and
Yeah, I think a good example of that would be, you know, so I think back to my high school when it closed. I was a speaker as a sophomore in high school to the school board in the hopes that they would not close my high school, because the choice was close my high school or combine 3 football teams together. Guess who won? Right? Because usually when it comes to things like football, there's a budgetary implication, right? But also think about the extracurriculars that have been co-opted between Logan and Central now, and we have not done any, you know, we haven't really had conversations about those, because again, I think football has a specific heartstring that it pulls, but maybe not necessarily a theater program, right?
We
I mean,
combined
and
our
again,
show
here-
choirs.
I
Right.
want to
That
talk
was a
about the
big
theater.
That was a big deal, right? But I mean,
And
there
yeah,
could be some
yeah.
that aren't.
But
you know.
that's a good example too, because like the removal of a program as a budgetary concern is very different from the addition of a program, right? Where if there's going to be a bidding process for materials and it exceeds a certain threshold, we've already said, we want to make those decisions, right? The removal of a program like that, it's incumbent on us as the board to know what's going on and to
Correct.
insist from the superintendent that we're being apprised of all those situations, so that if that situation comes up, we do have the opportunity to say, Mr. Board President, I would like this as an agenda item. We have to give some specific direction on a decision of that magnitude.
But I think, I think a lot, currently the way it is, we don't know about them until the decision's been made, and then we deal with the aftermath, which isn't helpful to anybody, including the original decision maker.
We were providing I mean, not all of you were here during the French debate,
Right.
but we were providing email updates along the way with the data and the things that were going on.
But
Same
that's
thing
my
with-
point, is we're missing, we get that information. You send us lots of good emails. I'm not, I don't, but I think the piece that I think is missing is the public discourse, is the discussion about, hey, I'm thinking about cutting football, and having a discussion, and maybe our policy needs to be about having this public because I think if the public hears us discussing it and knows we've worked through it and why we've worked through it, it settles differently than, what the hell's that administrator doing? I personally, I think that public discourse is a
you're-
piece that's missing.
We got you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, there's points that are made at this board meeting and people vote yes or no, and I have no idea why they voted yes or no. And before that happens, I'd like just about get input from everybody. What's on your mind in this? That might change my mind, et cetera. But it seems like we don't have those discussions, and I'm not sure why.
So I think.
I don't think that's a feeling of coherent governance. I think, again, that comes to us, because
And-
when we bring something for a vote is our chance to push on those
Mm-hmm.
things.
So I guess then the question comes to like, at what level do you want to get?
Well, and that's
Like-
what was going to be my point.
I wouldn't cancel a football program without bringing that to the board, because it's going to be super political. You know, it's going to rise to the level of a community crisis. Show choirs, you know, it was probably 3 years in the works. We worked with the choir directors. I said, we'll talk to your parent groups, make sure that they understand what's going on and they're on board. And eventually it seemed like a natural thing, and then they came together. I apprised the board of the situation along the way. Is that something you want to talk about in public, as opposed to having that go on behind the scenes with the folks that are involved? Do you want to cut art club at the elementary school if there's only 6 kids involved this year? You know, like, it gets to like, what level do you want to be involved in extracurriculars? Just like, do you want to be hiring a superintendent, or do you want to be picking out paper clips? Do you want to determine the surface of the roofing materials?
That's pretty extreme.
But it
But there's somewhere in between, right? There's a point where it's necessary for it to become before the board, and there's a point where it's not. And finding that point is always a tension, right? You know, and like, at what point is the tipping point? Because you don't want to deal with all that stuff. And you want to be the place of last resort. You want me to make a decision so you can adjudicate and sit in that next seat, as opposed to being the people that decide, then there's nowhere to go. You know, so I totally agree, there's things that need to come before the board, you know, that are appropriate, but there's a lot of stuff you probably don't want to see until it's absolutely necessary. And you'll have to put up with some public comments from time to time, you know, because.
Well, no matter what, we're gonna put up with
Yeah.
that.
But I think,
yeah.
yeah, and I think that the point that I was getting to with what you just said is, where is that dividing line? Right? Because again, we need to be clear, who is responsible for a decision? Is it us, or is it the superintendent, AKA the administration? Where are we going to draw that dividing line? And I think that, you know, a good example of that football team versus, you know, the show choir, how do you divide that? Right? What's the dividing line? So that the administration is clear, these are the things that you cannot do, these are the things you can do. These are the things that we will decide, these are the things that you can decide because we're giving you the authority to do. So I think that's where maybe coherent governance is difficult, especially for brand-new people, because if you serve on any board, usually on a nonprofit board, you're in the weeds, right? You are making some of those decisions, but here, we're trying to keep ourselves at a higher level of the policy side of things versus getting into the weeds on the nitty-gritty. But that, again, that doesn't mean we can, it just means, how do we draw that division so that the superintendent is clear?
And I think, I mean, examples of how we can do that is talking about the level of budget impact, the level of student impact, defining how controversial an issue is. I think there are ways to do that versus just saying it's all one or the other. I think there are ways to do that. I don't have good examples right off the top of my head, but
Yeah, and that's a good point, right? I mean, again, that's getting back to that idea of where's the dividing line, and then put it in policy, so that we are clear, and then Tim and then Jim.
I was just gonna, that actually kind of cover that, but is coming up with some sort of guidelines on when he is presented it then he presents it to us somehow. I mean, yes, could some of it be missed, but, you know, obviously if it did get missed, then we have issues with it. Like, you didn't bring it to us. This was in part of our policy that said you should have brought it to us. So I guess creating some sort of policy with guidelines of things that you do bring, right? Like, you know, if you're canceling curriculum or you're adding,
Lacrosse.
Yeah. So I guess, yeah, that's where it would get to like, let's
I
look
don't
at.
mean that
no,
negative. I
Let's
just
look
mean
at the.
we did, that's
yeah.
why.
Yeah.
Let's
we
look
did
at
that
like the
lacrosse,
operational expectations. Is there an operational expectation that we currently have where this already falls into place? Do we already have something in place? And if we don't, then we need to be more clear in direction to the superintendent what it is we actually expect. So I think that's a good example of where these policies are important. Jim?
Well, and I don't know where that falls, but we've been in enough different schools and people are saying we need additional whatever, let's say teacher assistants. And I asked at the last meeting, and I don't know whether it's appropriate or not, but I'd like to know when the district adds additional staff. Like, hey, listen, we just added 3 more teacher assistants to help at school X, Y, or Z. Now, is that appropriate or not? I mean, when we go to those linkages, people are saying, I've had these kind of problems in class. I really need somebody in this classroom. Now, what do we do with that information? And when does it happen? I understand right now the budget is where it is, but when the budget is okay, will we be adding staff to assist in those classrooms? Not really for me, but for the students in those classes.
And so I guess to get more clarifying on that, Jim. So for example, we do get the HR report, right? Every
I know, but
meeting.
I don't know if they're additional,
Sure.
we get the whole list of people that were hired,
Mm-hmm.
but is this a new person added to Spence or Hinton or wherever, or is it, no, it's replacing this person,
Sure.
and there's a difference.
Right, and so, and what I was gonna say to that, so we get the HR report, right, currently. So what I'm hearing you say is that it seems as though that's not sufficient information. And then it comes down to, does the board feel that it is insufficient information? If it's insufficient, what do we expect to see in that report? Because in the past, it's been, superintendent, we are charging you to ensure we are staffed appropriately, and that you have postings out there to fill slots, and that you're doing your due diligence to ensure all slots are filled as appropriately as possible within the budget. So that's the authority. So I think that that's a good place where we could say, like, do we need more? Then let the superintendent know this is what we expect. Are we okay with what we have because we are trusting that you are doing your due diligence with your staff and administration to ensure everything is filled? So I guess that's where,
I think the
you know,
hard thing-
what do we need?
I think the hard thing also is, it's hard to hire staff,
Right,
number one, but I don't think he's asking I mean, it could even just say added position next to it.
Sure.
You know, just so.
but that's what I mean, is like, we just need to be more clear
Yeah,
about what
but,
is
you
it
know,
that
I
we're
don't wanna
looking
create a
for.
bunch more work for him, and I
Right.
don't think he does either.
No.
But if we would just put, okay, in Spence, we added this, you know?
Well, I think it would be useful to know, as board members informed about what's going on in the district, is just like, are all of the positions filled at capacity at the place? Like,
Right.
are we still looking?
Yes.
Because it's not just the budget, it is, as you said,
Yeah.
like, it's hard to find people that, you know, to hire. There's a shortage, sort of, of people
Yeah,
willing to do it. So just knowing, like, which schools are at capacity, which schools are still looking, that might give us some context.
I agree. What I'm really interested in is like, what are the constraints we're under within the budget? And if I'm understanding you correctly, Jim, that's kind of what you're interested in, is if, you know, if I don't see any teacher assistants on the HR reports for 3 months, does that mean we're 100% staffed? But then we hear at a linkage, I need X, Y, Z number more teacher
Yeah.
assistants in my building.
It
It's
was
not
just-
easy for us to see in, you know, from the budget, like, is the reason we're not buying, the reason we're not hiring more because we can't find them?
Right.
We have the positions open and they're posted, or because within the budget, we don't have the budget for it, right? That's the kinds of information I would be very
I'll
interested
go
in.
Jeff.
Yeah, and I can just speak from an outsider perspective, but every school I've ever been at, there's always a need for more staff. I mean, that's just, and we could throw a bunch of people at it, that's, it doesn't necessarily gonna make a bigger difference throwing more people at it, and hurting our budget. But I just wanted to throw that out there. When we do hear stuff like that, I know if someone comes to me and has concerns about staffing issues, I asked them if they've talked to their principal. That chain of command, I think, is really important, so we're not jumping right.
And as a
Top.
building principal, I recognize that.
Yeah.
And maybe to circle back, it sounds like the policy is not insufficient. The policy is good, but an indicator that we might like to have is this
Or-
piece.
Or,
134.
yes, exactly, or another.
Maybe there's some
yeah.
others we can like
do have the HR
alleviate.
report.
I was gonna, and that's what I was gonna say, right? We have operational expectation 4.
Yeah.
Right, personnel administration. So once a year, we do talk about these things, and we do have Matt Wenthy join us up front and give his report, and we have specific indicators in that. So either, do we need another indicator? Do we need to look at the policy?
I
Do
think
we
that-
want to see the
yeah.
policy more than once?
I think the
don't
suggestion
we need-
over here, like, so, what Katie had asked of Patty at one point was like, hey, could you provide some detail for this budget, quarterly budget, monthly budget thing that we get? And that's been helpful, just kind of like being able to read it, kind of like walking you through it a little bit. I think there's a way we could beef up our HR report a little bit too, noting if there's new positions to the district above and beyond the budget that was set at the beginning of the year, or, and notating just kind of like percent filled either by type or building. You know, it'd be very easy to add
Yeah.
that information in a way that's not tied to another report or indicator, just like
And
more
not
robust.
onerous either.
Just
Yeah.
information that.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for allowing us to have this discussion, because really, I think some of our discomfort with the policies isn't that great, but we, just knowing we can make them what we want, I think gives us a like, okay, we can do this. But I think questions like about what information we want or we don't want, I think will help us get there instead of just saying, what do you think of policy 6 or whatever? So I appreciate us doing that. I have several thoughts. So one of the things that might be helpful based on what I'm hearing in this discussion to think about, and we kind of did it in the past, your emails to us are very good and very helpful, but I would say a good share of what's in those, oftentimes were in reports to us, not actionable reports, but information reports. We'd have a discussion about it, and the public could see that we know about it, and it isn't just this email that we get and the world doesn't see that. I think that you're communicating with us transparently, but the world doesn't see that, and maybe we could continue to improve on that. And I think, because what I'm hearing is people just want more information. One of the things, again, you only start with your own frame of reference, so I apologize, you keep going back to how we used to do things, but it really worked well, was with the budget process I think it was around February, because contracts have to be out shortly thereafter, around that time, if I recall. But we would get a report as a board that here's our proposal on staffing for next year. And and included this is we're adding ag, we added these 2 positions for ag, and we're gonna not do this, or we could have a discussion about that. We're not approving the budget, but we'd have a discussion about it, and the administration would know where the board stood on these proposed changes versus giving us a whole bunch of stuff in September saying, make a decision on it so we can get it published in October. And I think it provides a more meaningful conversation. It doesn't say that the staff, I keep saying staff, I apologize, but the administration can't have a whole lot of say on the budget. But I think, again, just making some of that stuff more transparent, I think would help us all feel more comfortable, and it doesn't really change a lot of the policy per se, but I think it changes how we feel when, we get a lot of information, but we have to wait for the next 8 months till we get that report. Where again, if there's some of this more information going on, I think we aren't as like, finally we got this report, now we have to really jump on this because this is the facilities, I've been waiting to get into this, or whatever it is.
I think that would be an interesting piece of information as well. And that's a report you used to receive, is what you're saying? So,
And we
yeah,
didn't
because.
approve it because
Right.
we aren't approving the budget.
Right, but let's go back to French, for example, right? If we get that report in February and we see the anticipated needs in the French program have gone down to one person or 0 people, right? Has there been, we can compare, like, is there an explosion of math teachers, right? Or whoever, right? And that can be useful because staffing reflects priorities as well, right? And does give us a chance to open up further conversations that are related to what do we want on offer in our district, right? Which is that, again, that higher level that I think is where I want to sit, you know, so.
I'm gonna try to find it, but I believe Patty does provide us a budget book
Yeah.
that has.
I don't know if it's broken down by
It has
category.
some administrator goals that,
Right, yeah.
you know, I think would also,
Right.
you know, is that a place where maybe information could be
Sure.
included where it doesn't necessarily,
Right.
it's not
require-
necessarily a
yeah.
policy, it's not necessarily an indicator, but it is, I mean, I know that those are in there. It's
Right.
just a matter of seeing, like, you know, again, I think in the end, what's important is the board clear
Right.
on its expectations to the superintendent? And that way, the superintendent can provide the information we are wanting him to provide.
Right.
Tim, were you trying to say something?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of that alone, last week when we were in a little breakout session with onboarding of new school board members, I mean, this is great, this conversation, but technically it's happening, 7 months later, is in our governance culture, and I read that, the president's responsibilities, VP responsibilities, if we could put maybe a responsibility on, say, the VP of, you're in charge of onboarding the new school board members in terms of getting all of the stuff that we just saw, some other things, and have them have that understanding at least a little bit, because trust me, it takes a lot longer than just reading what we're supposed to do to figure it out.
I think we recently talked through putting that responsibility on administration to ensure that it is a consistent process.
Across
Beca-
boards, you mean?
Yeah, across VPs,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. I
I
mean,
mean-
maybe it's something in partnership, but like,
I like the idea of it being a board responsibility to develop yourselves. The challenge would be you could get somebody who was just elected and they're the VP and naturally they'll turn to Laura and I hope, and say like, hey, help us out, I'm responsible, but I'm gonna need you to do some lifting here.
Right.
And I think that's reasonable. But that would be a way to like put it someplace. Now somebody's got that hat, they know it's theirs.
We had just heard from a few of other school boards that have had adopted that, and it fell on the VP, it fell on, they kind of put it wherever they wanted to, but it was really beneficial, especially with the, the changeover in school boards now that happens, people are running one terms and then they're done, so.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, there were a number of sessions that you sit in and you listen to people, and there's a mentorship type program there that you're attached to another school board member that has some experience, and that person mentors you, looks over your position, helps you through different situations as far as what's happening, even going through board policies.
Yeah, and it's something in my first year we like talked about, but didn't necessarily come to fruition within a reasonable timeframe, and so, yeah, absolutely, I think some
We
kind
were a
of
little busy
onboarding.
with the referendum.
We were a little busy, yeah, so.
Yeah, trust me, I'm not putting any blame on anybody.
No, it's something that's
Obviously,
gonna
we learn
require.
from, right?
It's
Yeah,
just
I don't know
suggestion
what
for
I'm
the
gonna
future.
do.
Because eventually the people who put that into place are gonna be gone, right?
Right.
And new people will need to know, like, how do we wanna keep this going? So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this changing in the number of school board members is new to this district. I could probably count on the 17 years I was on school board before, probably, I don't know, I'd say I probably served with 20 people over 17 years, and including the 8 that were there when I left. And I didn't serve with any of you. So that just goes to show that it has changed. That dynamic has really changed. I mean, there were several years in a row where we just all would hand each other the nomination papers because everybody just kept running. We all just kept helping each other get back, and it was just a different time than it is now for many, many reasons. And so I do think acknowledging that shift, I think, is really important.
And part of that is, is external to us. It's the
Oh,
changes
for
in the
sure, for
demographics,
sure.
it's changes in the shape of the city, and, yeah.
But some districts, not only with board members, they had mentors for their new teachers, mentors for their new principals, et cetera, et cetera. And they had all gone through mentorship training. And so that was whole part of it. A school that I was impressed with is Reedsburg, Wisconsin, and how they talked about all the mentoring that goes on, and they felt good about stepping into new positions.
So for the policy work tonight, how do we get out of the weeds from where we're at right now?
Can I raise an example real quick? So we were talking about the hypothetical of the football program. Well, OE 8, right, tells us the superintendent shall ensure that the board is fully supported and adequately informed about matters relating to board work and significant district concern, right? So that responsibility to open that discussion about something of significant district concern already exists in our policy, right? To create that space for the board to discuss it, right? Now, on the other side of that, what is a significant district concern, if it's up to the superintendent to interpret that, there's the possibility we might disagree that, hey, canceling the football program is of significant district concern, and you didn't bring us this in an adequate way in keeping with our policy.
Dr. Engel's gonna cancel football.
The remedy
waiting
to
to read
that,
about it
though.
tomorrow.
Right, and this is all, again, hypothetical, right? This is all hypothetical, but then the remedy to that is also baked in with the superintendent's evaluation,
Correct.
right? Like, and again, it's incumbent on us as board members to note and make sure that part of the conversation comes back and to hold that accountability.
Correct, which again, every meeting, we are completing the superintendent's evaluation. Right? Every operational expectation is part of his evaluation. Every result policy that we talk about and vote on is part of his evaluation.
We could
So-
set them up to fail by that. I mean,
Yeah.
we don't really, so we say, what is significant, you had brought it up, what's significant to you may not be significant to me and vice versa.
But
So-
remember, it's not about individuals, it
But
is about
then-
what does the board vote
Right.
on
I
to
think
say is significant.
And then-
Yeah.
OE 8.13 says, inform the board in advance of any deletions of, additions to, or significant modifications of, or any administrative policies, or any instructional program. So I think that's the
Right.
place
Yeah.
where this is located. So
Right.
then it's a matter of defining what significant means. In our monitoring report, we cover significant modifications, which shall mean changes that require considerable professional development and resources to implement. Doesn't cover, what a deletion means, which should be pretty clear. So the board was notified in advance that we were considering scaling back the French program over 2 years, so there was notification there. Then it's a matter of, if the board wants to bring that up as an agenda item, ultimately that's up to the board to decide if that's the time to do so. And then, if it's something like when we ended the year-round program at Hamilton, we had a workshop to discuss that. When we ended the year-round program at Northside, I sent out an email. We'd already tread those waters, we knew where we were headed.
I think it would be like if we were looking for a opportunity to engage the public in those conversations, to your earlier point, Deb, like that would be up still to the board to realize that you're engaging us in a conversation about closing or stopping the year-round thing, right? And then the board president or all of us who get a say in the agenda could say, hey, look, I think we need to intentionally engage the public on this one. Let's send out emails, social posts or whatever to say that, like, we want your feedback on this, email us or sign up to be a public speaker at the board meeting where we're discussing. I mean, that would be a board decision to try to engage the public more in that way.
We could just say it has to be an agenda item too, which is the same virtually. We're making it known then that.
Like an information or a,
Could be for discussion.
Discussion, it could be at least where we each can talk about it,
When
because
I-
it's on the agenda.
When I said public discourse, maybe I used the term incorrectly. I think the public just seeing us wrestle with issues, I'm not saying we have to engage them in things, because there's sometimes we do, but I think the public just seeing us, but if we just go, yep, there was an email,
Yep.
approve. I think we're missing some connection with the public that we need to be building, but if they see us talking about it, and, you know,
On the
the
agenda.
budget is this, we have 6 kids in it, da-da-da-da-da, and we have a discussion, you know, there might be a discussion that these 6 kids are the most disenfranchised kids, and they deserve this, and maybe we need to have that discussion.
I think that's a great point, Deb. And the fine line there, or maybe it's not a fine line, but like, I'm sorry if I jumped in, Jim.
Well, my point was going to be on the bottom of the first page that we got today, I think says it all and is a huge, huge umbrella. Students will discover and develop their talents and abilities and will be prepared to pursue their dreams and aspirations while contributing effectively to the local, state, and national and global community. That comes under the board policies. I mean, that's one of our policies, that we're gonna do the best we can to support the kids to do the best they can. Now, that's a huge umbrella right there. You know, what doesn't fall underneath that one?
And I realize there's an interest in public discourse and you having, like, clearly aware of when things are going on. I would also argue that in the last 4 years, other than school closures, the only thing that's really come to the board are teacher wages and the French program. So we've made a lot of significant changes over time, and the public hasn't been that concerned.
And I understand that, but if
They,
it was,
they didn't show up, you didn't get emails, there was no op-eds.
That's true.
There's not that much of a significant concern.
but if it is an agenda item, at least we can say, well, it was on
Totally.
the agenda and we're, you know, it may be, okay, we all agree and table it, right, you know, that which happens, but as long as it's an agenda item, I think it's not anything to be, I don't see any
Right.
sweat on our
I'd-
part of it.
And I agree, and I think where I was gonna go was slightly different, was just that, you know, every time something like this comes up, it's a heavy lift to put into place a plan of action to go and schedule all these meetings and invite the public, and there's a cost to doing those things. I agree that the discussion at our regular tables needs to be robust, and this is the place, right? The community, if they want to be informed, if they do care about these things, needs to take the step of investing themselves in our meetings. We need to take the step as board members of investing in the conversations and voicing our perspectives in these moments. That's what the meeting is for, exactly. It, as we've kind of noted before, it happens in real time, even though it doesn't always feel like it.
Sure.
so.
I would also just remind the board members as a whole that we have had some pretty long board meetings, right, with short agendas. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't have those conversations, but what I am saying is that also is incumbent upon us to be mindful of the amount of time we're spending on each agenda item. When we get to them all, do we need to extend the time? Those are all good and important things, but also recognize that we can have very, very long meetings and get into very, very long discussions, and in the end, did we accomplish anything in the discussion? So I think that's what we all need to do as well, is be mindful of, let's make the conversations meaningful.
Right.
And as long as they have to be or need to be, rather than, you know, some of our meetings where we've had very, very short agendas, and I'm thinking, oh, we'll get done in an hour, and 3 hours later, we're still here, right? And extending the time on top of it. Jim?
But some of those discussions, whether you think they're worthwhile or not, are very knowledgeable.
Sure.
People understand why people made that decision.
And again, I'm not discounting that. What I'm saying is, we need to be careful about how long, because we also have that policy that says we need, you know, we extend it. And again, that's all good and fair and valuable and important, but just recognize that the more you add onto
Yeah,
that agenda,
I got that.
right, that's what's important.
But I would also say, I think if we had some of these discussions on some of these topics, the one time a year this one topic comes up and we just belabor it, might be less, because we've had some of these issues already addressed. It won't happen in all cases, but I think that could be helpful. And I guess to Dr. Engel's point, we maybe don't get people showing up and emails and things, but we all hear people in the grocery store or at church or wherever we go in the world. And quite frankly, hearing the board discuss an issue and wrestle with an issue that is just maybe an information item that administration could still make, I think builds a lot with public because they can see and the public gets to know we're working through the issues. How many times have I gone to City Hall to argue about something? I might not get what I want, but as long as they've really worked through it, and they're set up differently, but I also think it insulates the administrator because we've all heard on occasion some negative comments about, unfair negative comments about the administrator. And it's because sometimes the public perceives, right or wrong, that we're just rubber stamping what the administrator gives us. So these discussions that we have, I think, offsets that and changes that dynamic and shows the administrators listening to us and we're listening to administration, and I think it changes that dynamic in the community.
And just as important, I think, in our regular order is where we're able to point to, well, no, we're not just rubber stamping. We have in fact on such and so occasions said this information is inadequate, or we aren't meeting these standards, and we're not glossing over those facts. And we've had that conversation several times over this past year, that like, if we're not in compliance, like the most accurate vote right there is not in compliance, right? And that's important to just keep that element.
In the interest of tackling some other topics tonight, OE 8.13, I think, is the clear place where this is addressed. Inform the board in advance of any deletions of, additions to, or significant modifications of any administrative policies or instructional programs. What I'm hearing.
Are you reading this?
OE 8.13, yeah. The very
Oh,
bottom one. Yep, last
13.
one, 13, sorry.
I'm like, under one, I don't see a 3 under one.
Got
Oh,
army
sorry.
stuff in my head today. So I could see changing that indicator or that policy to say something about bring to the board, or, inform, more than just inform, some sort of at the board table type thing. And so what I would propose is, if the board is interested, I can look at a policy suggestion for that, for the next time we meet, and bring it to a regular board meeting. And then I would also define significant in our monitoring report, so that it's clear, like, what level that rises to. Is it, sixth grade art club, or is it the football program, or is it show choir, or is it the French club? And then with that recommendation, that I think would tackle a lot of, concerns about like the direction, which is high level board stuff that folks are concerned about. And, maybe there is, to Deb's point, a natural opportunity in February when we're in the, late, early stages of budgeting, to kind of like, hey, here's the plan for next year, this is what we're thinking about. And then there will be some decisions made before that, but we would just bring that up in workshops or whatever else at the appropriate time, the board table. So I would propose that I'll craft a policy language change to present to the board, along with a monitoring policy change to define significant, so you know exactly what you're getting out of that.
I don't think it's just, there's other, and I agree, thank you. But I think that we need to have a few things on, let's say, boys club's adding their big, addition on, and we're giving them some land again. I think we have to be part of that decision. And that should be an agenda item where we talk about it.
With
We're
land.
giving up the pits, that Logan had over there. I mean, we continuously give up land to them. I think as a board, we should be part of that decision. And that's something that we really need to look at moving forward. And again, there's some stuff, obviously, buying paper clips isn't something we need to be part of. But I think if it's something significant like that, we should definitely be part of that.
Yeah, and fortunately, we're not selling any land there.
Yeah.
So we're retaining the property, just working with the Boys and Girls Club,
Yes.
so.
But here again, I think is a good opportunity. I feel the need for that, but the question, like for our workshop, is, does that already exist?
Right.
And I'm pretty sure it does.
Oh,
I'm struggling.
Yeah,
getting
OE 7, the superintendent may not purchase or sell real estate, including land and buildings. So that's
Well,
work
right,
that
and that's a
we
clear-
have to, yeah,
They
that's very.
don't have to sell it, they can give it, or they can let them use it, or, but I'm just stating that that's something that we can work on being part of, notified and talk about that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't
And we-
disagree,
yeah,
and so there
I think we are.
we're in the combination of policies here, that we need to be adequately informed. You can't just outright go and sell it, without our knowledge or approval, right?
Which is there.
And so then, I'm going back to Katie's point about like, where are we in terms of a workshop on this? Like, those are gonna be my questions, is like, does this already exist for us? And then how are we, what changes, if any, are necessary to respond to that felt need, right?
And maybe there's something about use of land or lease agreements or other things to kind of clarify, the specific things the board needs to be involved in.
So to answer your question, because I'm a bull in a china shop more often than I should be, I'll say this, if you sit down and you read every word of these policies, well, first of all, you'll fall asleep. Then when you wake up, there's not words in here that make you go, oh my God, I can't believe that's in here. There's nothing that's gonna make anybody say that. But when we start really digging into what does it really mean, that's where we struggle. And so, Mr. Board President, you can go the direction you want, but I'll just say that as far as the policies are concerned, I'm still learning to dance with the indicators, and I'm willing to continue to do that. But the things in the policies that, if you ask me where I would like to have some discussion, one is on facility planning, where that bright line is between administration and board. Agenda planning, right now it's solely the president's decision on what's on an agenda. I've had a board member come to me privately and say, can't we have any input? And I said, we can send emails, but if the decision, would we want to change that? But the way it's currently in policy is how we're currently operating. Another one I'd like to talk about is committees. Sometimes a controversial, but I think sometimes talking about what we'd want a committee for might get us to an answer that we all come together on. And, this isn't a thing in the policy, but since we're talking about how things are presented, I would personally like to see some of these issues, like the community service fund thing that we had. That was, Jim and I, you and I voted differently, even though fundamentally we agree philosophically. That was a workshop, so we had staff come in and tell us about it. It was a workshop. I don't personally know why that needs to be a separate meeting, why that just couldn't have been part of our meeting, to talk about why it's set up the way it is, why administration's proposing what they're proposing. I think that could be a regular meeting item, but that's just my personal opinion, I just want to say that. But the three things that if I could say what I'd like to see a little bit tweaked in the policies is facility planning, agenda planning, and committees. I can't say I'm saying I absolutely have to have committees, but we've had a committee structure that has worked well in the past, not perfect, but I'd like to hear what other board members think. But that's just my thought. You can go where you want, Mr. President.
I think it does address committees in here, doesn't it? There's
Well-
a board of,
Officers' roles.
well, I think
No, there's
board
committees.
committees, GC
Oh, yeah.
5.
So the committees are controversial, because I think having a small group of people working on something to bring something to the board, like, one of the things we used to have was a governance committee. And so before every one of these policies would come up to the board for review, we would have the governance committee review the policy, and like three of us, would sit down and go through and really be like, yeah, this still kind of gets to what's important to this board. We don't recommend any changes, or we'd like to make this wording change or this wording change in the policy. So not just reviewing the superintendent's report on did we meet the indicators and the accountability review of it, but also the review of the policy. But the flip side.
well within the.
It is. The flip side is, then you, I'm going to say this right. So some people, the board, when like we had a finance committee that was working a lot on, working with the auditor and getting to know better about finances and working with the treasurer. So we as a board felt we knew more about finances at the time. And there were board members that felt like, well, that's just, if I'm not on the committee, I'll never know what's going on. And I don't get that robust discussion that happened at the committee. It doesn't happen again at the board table. So there's pros and cons to committees. That's why I say I'm not saying we should have them, but I think it would be good for us to discuss if we would, are there areas that we really would like to concentrate on? Would we like a small group of us to work on them for some time? I think it'd be a good discussion to have.
5 out of 7 of the last committees I had, and Gail Ettrick-Trumpel became committees of the whole because everybody wanted just that to be involved.
Sometimes,
And so then we just had 4 board meetings a week, or a month instead of 2.
Right.
You know, so that's certainly one of the contradictions. I think, you know, board committees, as defined by policy, are deemed helpful to the board in the performance of responsibilities. If they are established, they'll be used exclusively to support the work of the board, not to assist the superintendent in an operational area. And that's what the policy says, you know. So it makes sense definitely for governance culture, I think. If there's a need to rewrite policy on a consistent basis, to have that committee meet and do that work, I think that's great.
And we had a communication committee, and we had a legislative committee, because we really felt that the board's legislative priorities should be the board's and not just the superintendent's. Like, sometimes they're most often than not the same, but sometimes they're not, and we might have the same, we support a particular piece of legislation, but for different reasons. And so, those are ones we had. Again, the other thing I liked about the committees is you got to just know people in a way that you don't in our very formal meetings, and that was nice too.
I think, just to give some history, the reason past boards have not done committees is exactly that committees became a committee of the whole, right? And we didn't want a conversation happening in a small group that every board member wanted to be a part of anyway, like the finance committee with audits, like that. The board specifically on that one said, we should be having that conversation as a full board at a regular board meeting. We shouldn't be having a committee having those conversations. Also, the reason these workshops are now recorded and broadcast was because people felt that the workshops needed to be more open and transparent. So when we do committees, are we going to do that as well? We have challenges getting people to attend everything already that we currently have on the calendar, like linkages, like special meetings, like, CISA 4 board meetings or LPEF, et cetera. So this would be something else to add on to people's calendars, and we just felt, again, past boards felt like, let's forego that and let's always have the conversation at the board table. And if you read the policy, it also does state that the committees are ad hoc, which means that they end after a year. So you're always going to recreate, which makes sense, right? Because new board comes on, there'll be new people who may want to have an affinity for going to that committee. So just recognize they are considered ad hoc, which means they're temporary, and usually for a slated purpose. But that gives you a little bit of history of why we have not had committees in the past. So, again, I mean, if we want to have committees, we can have committees, but I guess that would be my question is, what is the committee going to do differently, and what conversations would they need to have that we shouldn't have at the board table, or should start somewhere else instead of just starting here at the board table?
I think given that our policies already allow for committees, we need to redirect our focus to what we came here tonight to do, and maybe have a different workshop to talk about whether we do or don't want committees.
I don't even think we need to consider the question of whether we want them or not. The policy allows us to
It
create
allows
them
it.
if the need
Yes,
arises.
if
I
someone wants
happen
to
to
do it.
share those concerns. I prefer the discussion of a workshop anyway. But I don't discount the possibility that a situation arises, we're like, no, we want 3 people to get together and like hammer this out, right? So I agree with you. I don't see that need when I think the workshop mechanism is satisfactory to me right now.
The hardest thing though is whether you agree or not, the workshop, like this we can't have this conversation at a meeting so this is our only time to be able to talk and hopefully make us better as a whole and try to get us all more involved. You know, I think she brings up wonderful ideas. If it's off topic, yeah, it's probably off topic a little, but this is, I think the whole point of a workshop is to be able to talk on some of these. And I, for one, think we have an overkill on workshops because we talk about the meeting and we go into a workshop, but there are times that we really need to talk about everything, and I think this is a prime example of one of those.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying, is I think, but even like the workshop needs to have the focus of a committee, right? If this is our finance workshop, like that's what we should be doing, right? But again, then it's a committee of the whole, and workshops by design are not, you take no action at them, because I agree with you, the value is in the open nature of the discussion, and, yeah, I mean, we're people, it's gonna go off the rails every now and then, but it's on us to try to bring it back as well, so.
Well, I think if, for instance, there has to be some method of getting to know people better on an individual basis. The sooner you get to know each other, the better it is as far as the flow of conversation. I mean, I felt even just driving down to Milwaukee with Tim, opened up a good conversation between the two of us as he drove both ways. If there had been 3 or 4 of us in the car during that, how long did it take? 3 hours? 6 hours.
6 hours.
That was good time because you got to know each other on a personal level. And if you can get to know people on a personal level, I think the conversation is so much smoother. People aren't afraid to say what's on their mind. They let other people know, and it's a good way to talk to each other. And I don't see that happening.
At these workshops?
Well, this is a little better than some, but at a regular
Yeah.
meeting.
I mean, a regular meeting is a little more rule-bound, I mean, and that's for a good reason, but I see the committee issue as being hand in glove with the workshops here. Every workshop is a committee on a topic. Maybe people disagree with that, but.
No, I agree with you, because if we need to form a committee about something, then we'll have that discussion and form a committee about something.
Right.
And if I can move to a different topic, we can come back to it, but I wanted to get to the facilities piece. OE 12 does talk about the superintendent will develop and execute a facility plan that establishes priorities for construction, renovation, and maintenance projects that A, B, C, D, E. Project life cycle costs, ensure the facilities are safe, clean, properly maintained, ensure facilities are made reasonably available, ensure the board shall make the final selection when naming buildings, facilities, real property. So, I mean, we do have the policy states that the superintendent will develop and execute a facility plan. So at this point in time, the policy is stating that the administration has the authority to develop and execute a facility plan. And this is what I mean by, this board may feel differently. And if this board feels differently, then we need to then talk about that policy and make the right adjustments. But at this point, that's where we are at. So that's where maybe there's a feeling like we do not have input, or we don't create it ourselves, but that's the policy language that we have.
And actually, thank you for reading that out loud, because it made me think, there's really kind of 2 facilities plans that are the pictures in my head. The one Joe brings us that has each school building, Summit and all the school buildings, and then this is what we're going to do this year, and this is what we're going to do. Like, I think that works. I think that works well.
Pretty short-term, 5 years.
Yeah, I think that works well.
maintenance.
Like, I don't know where the hell you need a roof. You tell me. I don't know. I don't even know why roofs cost as much as they do, but I believe we need them, and I'm grateful there's no water leaking in them. So, I mean, that's as much as I know about roofs.
We need roofs.
They're good. But I think about, there's also another document that's been created about where we see our facilities going further than 5 years in the future. And I would like to see that document be more created as a partnership with staff and board together versus staff prepares it, presents it to us, and we say yay. I don't feel, because some could say that's the board's input on it, but I would like to see, again, a different kind of input on, like, yeah.
Can I try to ask a question to clarify what you're saying? Because I think I see the distinction between like the maintenance plan, knowing what every building and the existing properties is, the longer term projection of like, where do we see our needs in 25 years? How are we preparing for that now, knowing that these are huge long-term investments, right? That's the kind of thing you're talking about. Okay, so I can see that. I can see that and
Because-
having some kind of input. I don't know that like I personally or any hypothetical board member individually has like a total perspective to be providing too much direction to that. I would still lean on Joe and the administrative staff to really be looking at that.
I mean, what we used on the last one that we created is we had the architect, and I'm sure you've done, I know you've done this because you referred to it in terms of the report on capacity per school building. And so these reports, I mean, we had a binder with each school building and had about capacity and, you know, all the additions and the age of the square foot. No, I mean, there was good, healthy detail in there, not enough to overwhelm us, but good, useful detail in there. And then we could talk about, I mean, we had a discussion, I can't remember what year, I'd say probably around 2014-ish, maybe-ish, somewhere around there, about would we ever see a future with one high school? So, so that discussion actually did happen, and we all went, oh God, we don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole.
I know.
Lessons learned.
But I want you, like, we did, like, we had
But
a
it'll
good
probably happen
discussion.
again in 10 years.
I see what you're- I see what
That
you're
discussion
saying.
will
It will
happen
come
again in
up.
10
It will
years,
come up.
and they'll be like, why didn't they fix this 10 years ago?
But I will tell you, the difference
What
that
was
we,
it 20 years ago?
the difference we had then was the projections in student enrollment were not declining at the rates that we are seeing in the last
10 years.
8-ish years. It is really very different. So we were not, I've heard a staff person say, well, the previous school boards just kicked the can down the road. We didn't even see the can. We didn't know that there was a can. The can was just fine. And so,
Yeah.
it was, it's,
That's
some
fair.
things like that change, and so we did the best we could with what we knew, but we also had a really good discussion, and I thought about it often during COVID, about, do you need school buildings to teach? And how could you teach in different ways, and where are good learning things? So it was a good.
Turns out you do.
The COVID answer to that is yes, you do.
You do, but
You
I
need
think we-
community, and you build community in person.
But even
better
how
than
as we
online.
deliver education, how much of it is outside for our kids? How much have we talked about the outside space being so vital to our students? And, I mean, I think the way we saw school buildings 10 years ago and the way we see school buildings now, or a facility for education now, is fundamentally different because of COVID, because of how students learn, all kinds of things. And so we did the best we could. I think we had a good framework, but there were a lot of things we didn't know, and you have to update it regularly. But I think that it's helpful for us as a board to have that discussion and talk about that and give direction to the superintendent.
I also have an interest in the board approving a long-range facility plan, so I'll look
I
at
thought
where
we
that
did that
might.
last spring, did we not?
Yeah.
We did, yeah.
Yes.
We approved yours.
Yeah.
Yeah,
this
what
is
what
our
Deb is
board.
asking for is to be more, to more
And I have
part
no
of the
problem with
development
that
of
as well.
in the first
You know,
place.
generating the source material and the foundation, you know, and then administration takes all that generation and puts together a framework for it, brings it back to the board, review, edit, refine, like, our job is to do the work for you. You shouldn't have to be producing documents. You should be generating ideas and direction and policy. Then it's our job to like make it happen for you and then bring it back for approval. And so I could see a workshop where we talk about what does the future look like? Where do we want to go? And then we take your good ideas, we put them down on paper, we flesh it out, provide some detail, bring it back. You say, like this, don't like this, just this. We do all the edits, work it up really nicely, come back, board approves it.
But
we're
I
good.
so I'll just use this as an example. Middle schools. So, so the discussion there was discussion long before Lincoln was closed about consolidation, middle school consolidation. And it was done internally, and then I had parents calling me up saying, I can't believe, and look at this, and I think Engel's up to this, and da-da-da-da. And then it came to a discussion to the board about, do we close Lincoln? And then they said, we need the money, and we close Lincoln. It's kind of a very short version of it. But I think, had we as a board just had a discussion about, do we really need 3 middle schools, or does it make sense to have 2 that align with the high schools? And that way, again, it changes the community conversation that this is the direction of the board versus, darn that Engel, what's he up to? I think those kinds of things change that
Darn
discussion.
that board instead. I mean, you can
Well,
have
they
that
are.
too.
Well,
That's
that's
okay.
kind of
That's
what we're for,
okay.
though, yeah.
You guys did it,
Yeah.
right? You needed to close some elementary schools.
Well, I
but you
didn't
can't-
do that.
Well, I mean, the board did it as a whole, right? Like, we
board
we
did it.
had the,
Right.
I didn't close the building.
no, but what I'm saying is that was in front of you guys, or the
board at the time.
Some
The
of
board
us.
at the time, and then you diverted from that with a different plan. I mean, that's what happens when Dr. Engel says, we have too many elementary schools. Now, you guys come up with a plan.
Yeah.
And you did.
And I think this is the same thing. with
You
the
were
high
part
school.
of it,
Yeah.
in case you forgot.
I did I just,
You had the
You didn't say a lot as usual, but.
Well, yeah, I didn't want to.
I think there's also, a piece.
I would have
to-
smacked you.
Yeah, I think there's also a piece to remember about referenda, right? When they go well, it's pretty public what goes well. When they don't go well, we also are pretty public about what doesn't go well. Like what happens, what's the plan B if it doesn't pass, right? And so part of that high school referendum was that conversation of this is what will happen if this passes, this is what will happen if it doesn't. So, I mean, at least from my memory of those conversations, we did talk about, like, if this doesn't happen, we're going to have to consolidate at the secondary level, because this was a high school, well, it was actually a secondary referendum that was impacting middle schools and high schools. So,
And then people were mad that we were threatening them.
correct.
When we were like, well, if this doesn't happen, like, we can hang on for a while, and we can keep moving money around for a while to keep everything going. But like, eventually, the numbers will get down to a level, and then people were like, you're threatening us, you're threatening us.
Right.
And we're like, we're trying to explain what will happen.
Which also is kind of interesting
In 10
because
years.
not passing that high school referendum and then coming to the elementary referendum, it was very interesting to hear the community talking more about declining enrollment, talking more about the issues with the budget. And so it was almost as though, in my opinion, that first referendum kind of set the stage for the second one. Jeff, you got your.
Just really quickly, kind of going off what Deb said, like Baird puts out a study so they can give you a projection about enrollment. So what we did in my last district was we actually put together a 10-year plan looking at facilities, saying, okay, we know what enrollment's going to look like. So if this happens, then this is, and as a community, it's like a part of the strategic plan that's put together. So I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about, Deb, but it sounded like it was right on those same lines where you're saying, hey, let's get the community involved. So then when it comes to closing a building or if it comes to consolidating, hey, this has been the 5-year plan. We've continued to look at it yearly, update it. I don't know, just a thought as we, start to talk about strategic planning down the road. So-
I do wonder, to Deb's point, like, what cans we're not seeing, right?
Yeah.
Like, maybe we'll become a climate refugee state, and everybody will move here, and we'll have.
We are a climate refugee
Yeah, we're
state
in the
already.
There's a book
Right,
written on that.
right, but I mean, we're not seeing that demographic in our numbers yet, but potentially.
Yeah, you never
We
know.
could someday, like, I don't know,
So
just
Tim-
interesting to think about.
Yeah.
I mean, I can only
Can we
assume
plan 20 years
that
from now?
Dr. Engel's already been thinking about it in his own mind for the next 10, 20 years. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we all think about it, and things are gonna rise only in the future. I mean, it's kind of common sense, but.
Right.
And
I
we
mean-
could have a big flux in population again.
I
We
mean,
could have another baby boom,
I think
don't
about that
know.
all the time when I walk out my front door and see all of the older people that live in my neighborhood. I mean, those houses aren't just gonna be vacant. I mean, I think about that too. So it's a,
So we did do some talking about the number of indicators. How do we, it sounded like there was some form of consensus around the table that it's too many. So how do
Number of
we?
what?
Indicators.
Indicators?
And we're a little
Oh,
overwhelmed.
yeah.
We're overwhelmed with
There-
indicators.
It is overwhelming.
And it would be
yes.
mutually beneficial to reduce them. So
Yes.
like, how do we go about that?
How do we start?
I would say up until this point, there's been a continual interest for more indicators.
I know.
Right, every time we get into a policy and a monitoring, we're like, oh, we could add this, oh, we could add this, I would love to know about this. So I think there will be a conflict between us talking about it generically and then when we're actually in it and a desire to see
Yeah.
more. Because you're all very curious people who want to know what's going on.
So-
We've already talked about probably 20 more meetings that we can have a year.
Correct.
In order to get into the weeds even further, to spend more time. And our meetings are generally 3 hours long, which is insane. I've never been a part of a district that had meetings this long. So I have no trouble doing more indicators or fewer indicators. If the general direction right now, not in the thick of it, is like, hey, fewer indicators is okay. When we come back with monitoring report changes, I can suggest 2 directions each time and say like, hey, this is what fewer would look like. This is what the status quo or more could look like. And we can make that judgment each time we come up to them throughout the course of this next
I
year.
think that's a good idea.
But I also think on the board side of the table, we need to be looking at our own policies and seeing if we need everything that is in that policy, because what is in the policy, it's what generates indicators as well. So it's as much like, can the administration maybe combine or eliminate while still maintaining the data that we're required to do for the policy as written? And on the flip side, as a board, looking at the language and saying, is this really everything that we need, or are we asking for too much?
And I would say an example of a place that generates a bunch of indicators is OE 6, financial administration. And ultimately, we basically just go through the audit and pull out all the stuff that corresponds to all the things on the thing. And there's maybe one or two things that are extra, that we go generate, but.
Can't we just say a good audit?
Exactly. So theoretically, OE 6 could have one monitoring indicator that covers all policy elements, which is a clean audit.
Yeah.
And that could potentially suffice for the whole thing. And then you would hear the auditor speak, you would ask your thoughtful questions, and then we would all high five and get out of here. And then OE 6 is done. So that is a way to approach it. And there's maybe some other opportunities as we look through it for some kind of like source documentation. It's kind of like some big thing that we do, some event that kind of checks the box for all of those things, getting a little bit back to policy governance information and update reports versus like a whole series of things. But maybe in results, we're like, let's beef that up a little bit, because that's the thing we want to spend our time on.
Correct.
And those are the ones we're always asking for more different
Right.
indicators on.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't know which, I can't remember, the one that's like,
OE 10 and 11 are particularly important. They're the learning environment and the instructional program. The
And we
rest.
confuse them with results when we're talking about.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
One thing I am hopeful with this district visioning process when we get into it is that it will create some priorities in our community. And those could be things like great staff, great facilities, great instruction. And those would then maybe align with key policies that we focus more of our time on. And so then maybe if it's great staff, we focus on OE4 personnel. If it's great facilities, it's OE 12. We focus on our facility program. If it's, student achievement as a pillar, then it's results policies that we spend our time on. And maybe we intentionally cover the others, but don't belabor it. And we all agree that we'll set a timer for 10 minutes, and then we're going to move on to the next thing. That may be a way to tackle some of those other policies that are certainly important, but maybe not where we want to spend our time.
I think getting your suggestions on each one of these as we do it is beneficial. Because I don't think any of us, well, maybe a lot of you probably did. I had no idea there was 133, maybe 134 now after today, but, so I think we can, what you just said there, a clean audit, that just seems simple to me. And obviously you're able to ask questions and do that, but I think we could do that with a lot of these the only problem is the board turns every year, as we talked about, so somebody may have it, but I think this is, as they're properly trained, I think they'll understand that too.
Are there, for a while, when I started education, we didn't have state standards. Every school in every district wrote their own math curriculum, as an example. And then finally, why does Hogan, Alaska differ from La Crosse? And there were some standards put in place. We don't have anything like that for school boards? Standard indicators across the nation? They write these, shouldn't they be the same relatively between La Crosse and Appleton and Green Bay, et cetera? Aren't there some standard guidelines that people get to follow?
So
There's only a handful of school districts, 2 handfuls of school districts in the state that do coherent governance. And there's probably 40 or 50 that do some semblance of policy governance.
Well, at CISA 4, when I asked that question, how many of you are on coherent policy governance? Nobody. But then how many are in policy governance? They all were. That's what they said.
That's what they said.
Yes.
I have been in those districts and watched their board meetings. They're not in policy governance. They may have some policies that look like that a little bit, but they are generally not. La Crosse did policy governance. That was a commitment to policy governance. Most other districts do not do it. Their version of policy governance is not rooted in the philosophical principles that cause it to be policy governance.
They generate policy.
Yes.
Correct.
Right.
Coherent governance being a little bit new and moving from information advocacy reports to these more comprehensive monitoring reports we look at Veronas and Sun Prairie's and Chippewa Falls and Altoonas and Eau Claire's. We look at all the other school districts that do these sorts of reports, trying to make them better. We collaborate on a regular basis. Laura knows all of their secretaries very, very well. We're all kind of doing the same stuff, more or less. We're all about in the same place, So we have compared kind of to comparable school districts, and we've all experienced it in similar ways. Like, boy, it's a lot. But, from an accountability oversight perspective, there's a lot of good information. You can demonstrate to the public, our board expected this, we did it. It's really solid in that regard. I also think it's part of transparency is making it accessible. And when there's so much stuff, it might not be accessible. And so then people just like, I don't even want to deal with it. And so slimming it down, making it a little more concise. Laura and I talked briefly at one point about creating like a cover sheet that's graphically pretty, that has some highlights and some call-outs and some statistics, that kind of summarizes a report all in one sheet. And so when somebody wants to know about facilities, we can say, oh, here it is. This is what our district did this last year. It's really awesome. Or if they want to know about personnel, you can say, hey, here's average wages and where we rank in the CISA and the important things you want to know, the diversity of our
charts.
Exactly.
Pie charts or graphs.
Pie charts, graphs, line graphs, all the things.
Spreadsheets.
So I want
like
to
spreadsheets
jump
and
in
charts.
before Deb, just quickly to say, we've been sitting for about an hour and a half. So after Deb's comments, are we okay maybe taking a 5-minute break and then coming
please.
back? Would that be okay? Okay, Deb.
So if I were to answer Katie's question about, well, so what are we going to do about slimming them down? I think, and we do add some, but it's kind of like when you buy stuff for your house and then you forget you have to like take stuff out because you only need so much crap in your house. So I think,
School board goodwill.
yeah, there you go.
Give it to them last.
I don't think anybody would buy our discard policies.
Indicators. Here's a used indicator for sale on Marketplace. But I do think, like, and Aaron, your personality type is to overachieve. And so I think sometimes we have a lot of indicators because you want to just like, I not only just met this, but I really want to show you how I met it in all these different ways. Like, how did you meet it? What's the best way to show us you met it? And we'll believe you. You don't have to show us in 1,000 ways. That would be just my 2 cents worth. I'm speaking very generally. I'm not speaking about any particular indicator of any particular policy. That's just my 2
Yeah.
cents.
I'll hold you to, I'll just believe you.
Yeah.
Because there are, if I'm remembering correctly, there are a number of indicators where the evidence is identical. It's the same document, right? So like, why can't we slim that down?
Well, I mean, that is already slimmed down then, right? So like, that has already been
At
made
least from the
concise.
report generation.
From a
Sure,
process,
okay, and if
because
that's the goal, is
we're
to,
just
is to
seeing-
make the generation, yeah, absolutely, that's where the efficiency can come from, right?
All right.
But to look at it and for 3 different reasons, that seems fine for us to do, yeah.
All right, well, why don't we just take a quick 5-minute break and then we'll come back and continue on.
Cool.
we can continue where we left off, or if somebody has another, yep, go ahead.
Can I
Kevin.
ask you a question
Yeah.
then? So if I was hearing correctly, I heard a general sort of support for the idea of slimming down the OE6 specifically. I think it would make this workshop singularly productive if we came out with an idea for like, are we okay with, yeah, give us a clean audit. Does that mean, because what I like about the way policies are written is it's these affirmative and these negative statements, right? You will do this, you will not do this. Does present a clean audit cover all of these things?
Yes.
Correct.
So, if everybody's comfortable with that, what is the next step to begin the process of changing that policy?
So I'm getting, well, I don't think there's anything wrong with the policy itself. I think it's nice to enumerate the various things that the board expects. I think what I present in a monitoring report the next time we have an update is, here's how I'm gonna present the evidence.
Clean audit.
Clean audit.
So we don't need to go through that work of rewriting.
I would say the policy is fine, and it's up to the administration to bring forward indicators, and if we're okay with the indicator, that it's going to, one indicator is going to cover all of this, then we're good.
I would argue that the audit alone does not cover everything that's on here.
I would
encourage
agree,
everyone
yeah.
to read through here
Right.
carefully and make sure that you know what you're agreeing to.
Correct.
Exactly.
And I would say I probably won't bring just a clean audit. It will probably be this plus a couple of other things, you know, that meet the comprehensive nature of it, but it might go from 35 indicators down to 4.
So here's
You know,
one
potentially.
way we
It's
could
covered.
potentially have this
Covered.
happen, right? Is that it seems, based on consensus, the board would like to revisit OE6 in terms of reviewing the indicators. And so we would be asking the administration to bring back OE6 just to review a change in indicators, and then asking the superintendent, how long do you think you need in order to bring that forward so that we can take action?
Given that we have a meeting on Monday.
Well, it doesn't have to be
Again?
Monday.
We
I
won't
know.
report on OE6 until January, so we got a lot of time to like address that one.
Right.
That's not an issue at all.
You could change indicators before January.
Totally.
And that's what I mean, like, if this board wants to say, we'd like to see this sooner than January, like, what would be an appropriate time frame to get that done?
I'll work with Patty and get it in the next couple of months.
December.
Yeah,
Exactly.
be our Christmas present.
Yeah, yes.
But yeah, I mean, I think within a couple of months, you know, then we could talk about, like, you know, we're ready to present the change in indicators to the board, and then it comes in front of us. And that would be, I believe, I have to look again, Laura, is that just one meeting, because all we're doing is looking at the indicators, and so
Yep.
that would be a matter reserved for board action. We could take action at that board meeting to make the, you know, we're changing OE6 and we're done, the monitoring.
Would it be beneficial to do that to all of them?
I think from a workload perspective, we're naturally going to be reviewing the monitoring reports as we move forward. I can do a scan through them to see if there's places where it's obvious we could make some early changes and present that before we monitor it the next time, but otherwise, I think just iteratively, just making them
We don't have
smaller.
to do everything all at once.
Correct.
And I think as a board, as these come up, we gotta remember that we're trying to, shrink these, not add to it.
Well, and again, that's why we always had the two meetings, right?
Right.
The first meeting was to discuss what has occurred, and has the superintendent provided us enough evidence to say the monitoring report has met or not met, or has, you know, reached reasonable progress, whatever. Right, the second meeting was always to discuss the policy, language, and the indicators. Right, so that second meeting was really where the board members could even come and say, I'd like to see a change to the policy in this way. And then, you know, obviously, changing the policy could potentially impact the indicators, and then the superintendent would then have to make adjustments there.
And I can
We have to see
foresee
it
where
again.
many of them might decrease, but we may have some gains in a few of them. But
Correct.
Ultimately, I think we can make life a lot easier on
Everybody.
132.
I'd like to cover something before Katie takes off, because she has to write 7:45.
Ish, yep.
R3 is one where we've struggled with both the indicators to find something that reasonably measured student progress, but also wasn't a real burden on our teaching staff. And those are R5, or R3, number 5, and R3, number 6. recognize the impact and demonstrate awareness.
And this is a good example, right, and just to jump in quick, of something, to Jim's point, where in coherent governance, I think we're the only school district with coherent governance that has those statements as part of a policy.
And I love these as values about, recognizing how we are ourselves in the world as a part of social emotional learning, and also being aware of others and how, our society impacts others, naturally. But this may be something where we don't need to measure whether or not kids know it, but maybe an area where we can measure whether or not we taught it. And so these might be better put in OE 11, specifically OE 11.7, to talk about the instructional program that we have, as opposed to specific outcomes that we're measuring. And so it's one of those that's been a real struggle for 5 years, and I just throw that out there as an example.
This was a kind of sidebar conversation during the break, because I was sharing that quite a few of the indicators have evidence that they produce anyway, right? Like the standardized test scores and the audit and stuff like that, but there are some that are quite burdensome to the staff and administration to try to drum up some form of evidence that proves that what student results are, right? And this, I think, is a good example of that. And while I love what we're trying to accomplish here, the burden of proof is overly burdensome, in my opinion. And so that's where we were talking, like if we're talking about reduction of indicators, could we look first at some of those that require evidence that isn't organically created anyway? And this, because even when they do come with evidence, like, I'll speak for myself, I'm never satisfied with it. Like, it doesn't seem like we're really achieving what when we say we want here, and I think it's almost impossible to do that. So to your point, to move it to an operational expectation where we're saying, we do value these things and we want evidence that these things are being taught, but it's not tied to a student result.
Yeah. And again, to point back to what Jim has said, which is tying to what you're saying, is that no other district has these, and so for 5 years, we've been trying to figure out how do we measure it.
Yeah.
Right? And with others of these policies, we can look to other school districts and get ideas and suggestions about how they get to the end result of showing the board that the evidence exists.
I guess we know why they don't have it now.
Yeah, it's just,
Possibly,
it's
yeah.
been very, very challenging. And so, yeah, it does get to that idea of like, do we want to see evidence that every student has met this, which is a result, or do we want to say that our curriculum covers it, which is an operational expectation under
That's a good
instruction?
point.
So, Jim?
Well, and I don't know where we stand, but I look at 5 and 6 and read some of those words there, and then with today's political agenda, are we talking about DEI issues or woke issues? Talks about homophobia, transphobia, ableism. I don't know.
Doesn't
I'm a
matter.
woke person,
Yeah, does it matter?
so I like it, but
It doesn't matter.
are we treading there?
Yeah, I think it's the social emotional learning, the social awareness, the personal awareness skills that we're teaching kids that allow them to recognize where they are in the world and how the society impacts themselves and others. We could use different words for these or be less explicit if we needed to be, but I think the concepts are great and they're values that are clear in our community. We have an equity and education policy as well that asks us to, give kids a good shot at interacting in the world. So I think they're good values. I think it's just been really tough to provide something that the board has been satisfied with.
Yep.
And I think there's a clear expectation that we need to teach these skills to our students. But whether or not we can effectively measure them with the tools we have available, that isn't a complete burden on our staff, I don't know that exists.
I think this may be a good area where Ms. Sukla brought up, where there's a group of 3 or something to go through these, to see if some of these can be eliminated and work with you on it and bring it back to the board for everyone's thoughts. So we're not doing one at a time. We might be able to kick the can down the road a lot faster. Across the road, however you want to
Yeah,
put
I mean,
it.
the other way to do it is like the one we changed from policy to coherent, which is like set up a 2-day workshop for the entire board to go through them at once. I don't recommend it.
That's what we're doing right now.
Yeah, exactly.
How about I just bring some policy recommendations, whether to a small group or the whole board, hash it out for 15 minutes. Aye, nay, move on.
I'm going to say I'm uncomfortable with that because this is the board's job. It's not administration's job. And I think that puts you in a difficult spot. I understand why you want to do it and I appreciate your generosity offering that, but I think that's our job. I don't want the public to see us approving policy that board's policy, our policy that you're bringing to us. I bristle at that, to use the quote
We
from the
also
Tribune.
have opportunities when we're reviewing it to make changes.
Again, yeah, I mean, every single time that a policy comes up, we do have that opportunity, so that.
So my idea wasn't a very good one, is what you're saying.
No, I mean, I think that, you could have a committee,
Always a
but
drop in your
I
bucket.
also, again, getting back to the way past boards have thought about it, is like, are those 3 people, or 4 people, how many ever, are they going to also capture things that I might find valuable, which in the end is going to be brought up anyway as part of the whole board discussion, because I'll want to bring it up at that point in time anyway. So does it make sense to do a committee or not? I mean, I think, in this case, a committee might not be bad, because at least it would build a foundation to start with, and then we can edit from there. Right,
Well, and
Great
yeah,
committee territory.
correct,
three people can write language easier than 9.
absolutely. So,
And I
but.
wouldn't want
And
to
we can
see
still
any of
rotate
this
them
watered
between the
down
all 3
or-
groups.
Right, so,
Fine.
here's what I would propose. So I'm hearing some consensus again on R3, that maybe we're looking at eliminating 5 and 6 from R3. We could ask Dr. Engel to then consider where an indicator in operational expectation, did you say OE 10 or OE 11?
Oh, 11.7.
Okay, where this could be captured. But in terms of needing it in the results policies, I don't know that it's necessary.
For
Was
all
I
the
misun-
frustration,
sorry.
I couldn't support removing it from results if we didn't have it in the operational.
Yep.
Like, so I wouldn't support a vote where we remove this if we didn't already have it in place in the operational. And I would not want to see the language watered down either.
So
I-
it should be a policy in the operational, not an indicator in the operation.
Right.
So, yeah, I agree.
Was I misunderstanding Katie's point that the whole R3 could be moved to an OE? Was that not what she was
No.
suggesting?
No,
Okay.
it's 5 and 6.
Just 5 and
Just
6.
5 and 6.
So
yeah.
R1 through 4, there's, well, even 4, I think, I can't remember if that's one.
That was one
is-
where we did have a problem, because
Yeah.
they changed
Correct.
what they were
What was
able to
issued.
measure within a year.
But the
and
first
like-
3, for sure, are ones that other school districts
Yes.
do have, and we
Yes.
can provide evidence pretty easily on those. I think R4, we've had some challenge, but not as many as R5 and 6.
4 is fine now.
Yeah.
It was just before it was, we wanted kids to be doing the thing, which
Right.
is
Yeah,
great.
citizen
Yeah.
science,
Yes.
and
Right.
citizen
Yes.
science component
But
to
it was a
that's
burden
hard
to try and capture all that information as
The
opposed
teachers
to.
too got through that.
Yeah,
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood
yeah.
what I was
Yes.
in part of.
Yeah, 5 and
consensus
6
to.
definitely
Yeah.
are unique to our school district only.
Okay.
So, okay,
And I
so,
like that. I'm glad we have them.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't disagree. And I also agree with you, Meredith, in that I don't want to see them go away unless they're found somewhere else. And so, but that's the consensus I'm hearing, right, is that they don't belong here, they belong elsewhere, and so let's talk about where it should go. And again, getting back to, Trevor, your point of how do these things intersect? Right, I mean, here's an example of where there is some intersection, it's just, what are we trying to measure?
Right.
What are we trying to hold the superintendent accountable to? And how are we going, and what is the evidence we want to see? So, would we be hearing, and Meredith, I just want to, I'll pick on you just because, you did voice it. So would you want to see that exact same language as under the superintendent will, 14 and 15, let's say?
We're looking at OE.
OE 11, the
OE
instructional
Instructional
program.
program.
So
I think it
basic-
would be written slightly differently, though, because the OE is about what it would be that we offer this instruction versus the students will demonstrate learning.
Right,
Yeah,
there'll be
yes.
slight
Yeah, that
changes
would
to
have
the,
to-
to
that
the
would
structure,
have
but
to-
not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I did hear you say you didn't want it
Yeah.
watered down.
I don't.
Right, so, I mean, if we look at OE 11, the superintendent shall maintain a program of instruction that offers equitable, challenging, and relevant opportunities for all students to achieve at all levels defined in the board's results policies. The superintendent will And then we could change the beginning of number 5, where student, superintendent will ensure
Sort of like
students
ensure
or.
that the instructional program includes.
Correct. That-
Opportunities to recognize the impact of social location.
Right, so I mean.
You could sort of
well,
model it
yes.
on, yeah.
Some of the others in here,
On
but in the
5,
end, what we're
yeah.
gonna do is just move it in there and make it make sense.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay.
So, is there somebody who would be interested in maybe just doing that work, that language change, and then we could bring it up in front of the board as a conversational piece where we're
Yeah.
talking
My
about.
volunteers tribute, I'll do that.
I'll work on it too.
Okay.
Could have 2 versions of it to kick around then. so.
And then, if the board's okay with that, we could do it that way, and then we can also talk about creating a or more than one policy committee, where, maybe somebody has an affinity for operational expectations, but wants nothing to do with board superintendent relationship, right? So there may be different groups who may want to get together and just focus on those pieces. Or do we want one committee that is going to be the policy committee that is going to see all of them? How do we want to tackle that as a board?
I think a policy committee would be.
One. Look at that, I got so angry, my pen flew.
I don't know who wants to be part of that.
Right, but you're thinking just one would be
I just think
sufficient, that
that-
oversees it all? and-
Yeah, because I think then they get
Thank
done
you, I
early and
apologize.
then just go to the next one, and,
Yep.
I think it'd be just a lot quicker. I don't know.
Yeah,
So you're looking for a committee to go through all of this and bring forward, or what the governance committee had done in the past was every time a policy comes forward to the board, we would review it for any possible changes, because it'd come to the board for the accountability piece of it, and that's when we review it. So my question is, do we do it piece by piece or one big chunk? Is that what are you looking at or thinking about?
Well,
I don't have an opinion
I
either way.
guess now that you bring that up, it's almost like a 2-part. I think you can go through them to see if we can find some synergies by getting rid of some stuff, maybe adding to other places or whatever. And then maybe as it comes on, the board can do that. But I just think that if we can reduce this by making life easier, not just on the administrator, I think it'd be a lot more easier for us to understand too, instead of keep on adding
so
things.
maybe a way to accomplish both is that we would have a policy committee that is going to review the policies that are coming in front of the board at the next board meeting, or in the next
Or-
month.
Or after we get the monitoring report, and then prior to the next meeting, where
Could
we
be.
would be looking
Yeah,
forward,
I
they
mean,
would, they
I
would
think
do
it-
the review and come with.
Yeah, I think it just
suggestions.
depends on like how much time do we want this policy committee to have?
Well,
as
1 year would take them through all of the policies, if it's an ad hoc committee. And then
Right,
you're
no,
not
and I'm
doing
just
every-
saying, so for example, if we talk about it and then we want to bring it up at the next board meeting for the changes, right now, we'd already said we're going to just one meeting where we're going to talk about it and make changes.
Well, if
Right,
it
and-
makes
and-
sense.
Right, but that's,
Right.
what so that's what I'm trying to figure out, is like, where does it schedule, how, what's the work that they want to get done, so that we are all clear of the expectations of the committee. So Meredith, I'm sorry.
No, don't we? I think that the advantage of the piece-by-piece part of it is that sometimes I understand the policies better when I see the indicators.
Yep.
And then have a feeling of whether I like the indicator or not. That's when I really understand what the policy is about, when I'm like, oh, that's what this is?
Yep.
So I think sometimes when I look at these in the abstract, I'm like you said earlier, Deb, yeah, it looks good. I have no objections,
Yep.
But when you see the indicators, you're like, wait a
I think they
minute,
should be
that's not
stapled
what
right
I
onto
want.
it.
And then you have a better understanding.
I actually was going to say, although I really like what you said, I was thinking that we would look to any policy changes and have those approved at the meeting, or at least proposed at the meeting before the indicators would come. Because
Before the
indicators are.
monitoring report?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was, because
Yeah,
otherwise,
so-
how do you write the indicators if you don't know what changes we're going to make to the policy? But I really like what you said.
I would recommend a meeting monthly on a routine time and place so that people can put it on their calendar and you'll review the last month's policies and make recommendations for the upcoming board meeting. It would be a way to make it so you know when it's coming, and it'll be a little bit lagging in terms of when you're addressing stuff, but that's perfectly fine for our purposes as administration.
Because
But I'd like the indicators along with that.
Yeah, you'd already have them then,
You'd have-
so you
I know,
kind of
but-
know.
And as I
Right.
say, we usually get the indicators
Yes,
ahead, so.
Correct. Yeah, you always
Right.
get them right before
So-
the meeting.
So in our current structure, I think it's still I'm just trying to make sense of the timing, sorry. So we could still have the committee meets in the lead up to the monitoring report, the informational item, right? And they could come that night, having already looked at and come with recommendations to discuss if we wanted to act on changes that night.
But
Or,
it takes 2 meetings to do a change.
well, you go through the process then, but
Oh.
their job is to do the homework, come with, hey, we could reduce this, we could shift this, just as we're doing right now, right, at each point.
I do not want to be on that meeting.
We
Committee,
consider
thank you.
that within the regular board meeting as an agenda item, right? And that would fit either with the one meeting or the one meeting where we both get the information and approve it, right? Or what has been the traditional model where we get the monitoring report, we also get the homework, we have two weeks to consider it, and then we vote on the proposed changes. Am I understanding that right?
I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
basically what I'm hearing you say is like, we could either do it pre.
Right.
Or
Or
I think what we were
concurrent.
talking about was post, like, so
Right.
the board reviews the monitoring report, votes on it, whether it has met what we expect it to meet, right? Does it meet reasonable expectations, et cetera. After that, then the policy committee could take those things that we just did, give them time to see if there's any changes, and then in the next month, come back and hear the things from the previous month that, and we looked at, and here are the changes that we feel are
Yeah.
important. So I think,
I
I
think
think
that makes
we're all gelling at the same point.
I
It's
think
just a
that
matter
makes
of
sense, because
pre
we
or-
can't change the monitoring report, we're looking backwards. And then
Correct.
we have the time to consider.
Correct.
What's been brought forward, and
Yeah.
then to discuss in the approval what we want to have
Yes.
changed. if
So,
anything.
let me ask this, in terms of time frame, when do we want to start this? Because right now, we're in end of January, the new board comes in April, well, at the end of April, their meetings will start May, so really, this policy committee will only last between now and our last board meeting in April.
There's always a new board.
Right, and then once the new board comes up, you all as a new
Renew
board
it.
would have to talk about
Renew.
creating a new committee, because they only last until the board ends,
Right.
unless we extend it.
Could we just start it with the new board?
We could
That's
get
why I'm
started.
asking. I'm like, do you want it now, do you want it later? I don't care one way or the other,
Yeah.
but we should be clear with each other about
Yeah.
when do we want this to start.
And then,
And we have
when
to
the new board is seated,
allow Aaron
those
to
of
have
us
that.
who remain can be like, this is a plan we put into place, this is
Who
our
would like to be
goal
on the
with
committee?
it, let's
Yeah.
get started.
Yep.
That feels fine.
Good, good. Again, I just want to be clear, because
Is
my
this your way of saying
assumption,
you don't want to be on the committee?
I'm happy to be on the committee, but it makes it clear to me, like, does this board want it now? And we need to start that work now, so then we need to start building it, we need to start finding who the committee is, we need to start what is the purpose, who's on it, when are they meeting? Or is this something that, like, let's just finish out the year and start a new year with a new group of people again, you need to build a new common understanding with your new board anyway.
Right.
So my opinion is it makes a heck of a lot more sense to start it with the new board than it is to try to pick it up now, because then you'll have to change it anyway.
Yeah,
So,
I agree, absolutely.
okay. So then that will be something to wait for the new board to deal with in terms of a policy committee. Jim?
And I think it'd be good to have a packet of these expectations and then also the monitoring report, so that you could put one side next to the other in the same booklet. And you can say, oh, this is it, that's how they monitor that, yes.
So it sounds like that will be what will happen with the next board, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I think the committee piece, in terms of the policies, I think we're not making decisions, we're just talking about consensus at this point. But I do think that makes a lot of sense, and we can just have this board have that conversation at that point in time about what is the structure, what's the purpose, what information is necessary for the committee to finish their work. Okay. So now we've got
We got a
OE6, we've got OE6, we've got R3, we've got OE11, and we've got a committee. So we've done quite a bit in our 2 hours together.
I know Tim said he wanted to lead one of them, I'm pretty sure I heard him say, but I.
You are a problem.
Sounds like Tim chose you as vice chair.
You can stab him with the pencil.
I got a prior commitment that day.
So what other work do we want to accomplish while we are together?
Linkages.
Linkages.
Oh, just an announcement, in terms of the election of new board members, maybe you're interested, maybe you're not, but on January 30th, Thursday, there's a meeting at
Yeah, that's tomorrow.
That's tomorrow.
That's at Bennett.
At Bennett
O'Reilly's
O'Reilly's, yeah.
On Mormon Cooley, and what will be there is all the school board members and all the mayoral candidates and candidates that are running for that city district.
11, 12,
So
and
we're not
13.
necessarily interested in that, but they'll be sitting at tables and you can go up, they call it a meet and eat. So you just get to meet them and discuss whatever, hi, I'm so-and-so. So if you're interested in
What time does it start?
Well,
It's
4
4
to
to
6.
6, yeah.
Thank you.
So, Trevor, you had something about linkages?
Well, I mean, we had it on our radar for
Yes.
today, and I know we've had, again, so just going back, my memory of some of our discussions about linkages was, in particular, thinking about the, what's the word? Like the efficacy of the questions and getting the kind of feedback that we're interested in, right? And, I mean, in our recent linkages, and it's always interesting, there's a tension, because if you ask people what's wrong, that tends to dominate the discussion,
Correct.
right? And everybody has things that they wish were different, right? So I don't want to lose that opportunity for people to highlight challenges, because I think good insights have come from that. But I do like the opportunity to ask people to find those moments of celebration as well, so that we can keep doing the things that are working, right, or looking for those opportunities too. So I don't know if other people had different senses of what the linkages, what part of the aspect of the linkages situation we wanted to talk about.
And again, just a reminder, like, again, when we talk about things unique to the school district of La Crosse, the linkages with staff is unique to the
Right.
school district of La Crosse. It is something that we believe in. It is something that we believe is extremely important for the school board to remain connected. But just recognize that that is one piece that is unique. No other really, our facilitators would say that that's not a good thing to do, because it undermines the ability of people to deal with issues with the administration. And instead, they have for lack of better terms, a workaround to go around their building administration and go straight to the school board. Right, so, I mean, again, I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm just saying that's, again, pointing out something that's unique to us. And also, the board always sets the questions at the beginning of the year, like, what are the linkage questions we want to ask? So, I think that is also a good conversation, let's start it here, but I think in the end, where it's going to end is when the new board gets seated. And what do you want to see as your questions, but also what do you want to accomplish with those linkages? Who do you want to bring together? I think it's good to start it here, because it's going to be a long conversation, but I think in the end, the implementation will be after the new board gets seated.
I think that's
Does that make
fair.
sense? Okay, so.
Tim had
yeah,
a great learning at the board convention.
Yeah,
I just have one suggestion, is to start off positive instead of negative in terms of the
Exactly.
questions.
yeah,
I mean, one of the speakers that we listened to was fantastic. I mean, I've listened to a ton of speakers that like to start off with positivity first.
right.
It just makes more sense to start with the positive stuff first.
I think the question could be more specific too, right? That's very, very broad, what makes you proud, but like,
But I don't necessarily, I want them to talk about everything.
well, I do too, but I think in terms of being specific, like asking them like, what's working at your building?
Yeah.
Like, right? That's the kind of thing that I.
Also think positive and then concerns or opportunities.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to end in a positive, so, that's what I always try to do in my meetings is, you start out positive, you go through your opportunities or issues, and then you end in a positive too, because we're doing a lot more well than we're not, right? So we wanna celebrate the good things as well.
I was taught that the linkages are our way to talk with our stakeholders about, because our job is to set the policy, and our policies have to reflect the values of our stakeholders. And so it's really our conversation with stakeholders to inform us so that we can make sure our policies continue to match that.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
But
My only concern is that you're primarily meeting with your employees. You're not meeting with your stakeholders primarily. And if I were to make a recommendation to shift it, I think it's great to meet with staff,
I think it's weird you don't let administrators there. But you could meet with the elementary group, the middle group, the high school group, LEA, if that's 4, you capture everybody every year, everybody gets a shot to talk to the board. But then there should be at least 4, if not 5 or 6, community-based ones with the PTOs at district-wide parent, with local legislators, with regional representatives, with the Chamber of Commerce, with youth-serving organizations. I think that's where, some of those have probably slid off the radar from years ago, and I think to reinvigorate that point so that the balance of linkages are with the community and the stakeholders, not the balance with the employees. That's a perfectly valid thing to do, and I think it's great to get that feedback, but I looked at 10 years of linkage notes, and it's the same themes every single time.
Yep.
Not enough staff, tough kids, wish we had more money, salary and benefits, wish administrators were present more, wish they understood what we did. It's the same 6 things every single year. And it's good to hear that and get that feedback. And there are some variations and some ad hoc stuff, but I would just hope that the balance of the linkages are with the stakeholders in the community, not with the staff.
I think that's a great idea
I
to
second
have that.
That's what we used to do.
And my problem with that is, how do you get I'm gonna say this, a cross-section of the community to, I think that would be a good discussion question as far as where do you meet that general public? To have that good conversation with, and you don't get just a select few. I have neighborhood meetings, and I know when there's an issue, all I hear is the voices of those that are against.
With that being said, I think that happens though with our staff too.
Correct.
You're getting
Yeah.
just, I think,
Yeah, but you get.
The world is run by people who show up.
There's,
right?
when the entire staff is there, I don't think that's necessarily, you have the.
But we don't
maybe
get- but
somebody
we don't
gets
get-
intimidated
we don't
by the
get-
loud
yeah,
voice.
that's the
Yeah.
thing.
We had
yeah.
one where I'm pretty sure the entire staff was there. It was, and that compared to Logan Middle was night and day. Logan Middle had,
Oh,
what, 2
yeah.
people? It was
2 or
embarrassment.
3.
And
Yeah.
think about when that has happened, though, like the linkage attention was like everybody,
Yeah.
right?
It
And
depends on if it's during or immediately after their staff meeting. And we try and schedule them associated with staff meetings so that you get a broad cross-section.
Yep.
But depending on what's going on that day, or if the staff meeting got canceled, then nobody's showing up.
And it also depends on if there's like a moment of crisis, right, in the community, which we have just sort of been through. So clearly there was going to be a lot of interested parties, especially at the most intimately affected buildings, right? So
But I think there are natural opportunities to meet with city council, natural
PTO.
opportunities with, we go to district-wide parents, there's a natural opportunity to capture all those.
But,
That's a great thing that you say about city council, because I feel like we're on like 2 separate planets sometimes.
Absolutely.
When we have a lot of things going on,
It's 'cause
in the
we are-
future, we have some buildings and properties and things that.
But also
That are
remember,
gonna
it's not just La Crosse City Council, but it's like Town of Shelby Board,
Right.
Town of Campbell
Right.
Board,
Right.
right? And so, so it's all of
But
them.
we're so intertwined because strong schools develop what? It develops the city
Good.
and people move in and,
But
the
I'm ju-
school
yeah.
district is so,
Right.
yeah, but I agree with you.
Right, I mean,
That's
it's,
where
but
the end
we
is.
also need to be careful
Yeah.
because
Yes.
those communities are also part of the school district, so I don't want those communities feeling like, well, we're so intertwined with La Crosse, what about us?
That was
But
what
when
we
all
used
of
to
us
have,
are
was the
together.
local-
Yeah.
I love to hear, Aaron had some great suggestions about the linkages in the community, where you're building out, you're learning from the community. But what I think the linkage is, without putting administrators there, you're building a culture of distrust towards administration. And there's a lot of ways to gather information about, how we're doing or what's going on, and we've got surveys out there, and if you do kind of what Aaron suggested, I think that it's a better idea. But I think when you're talking about the community, going out, city councils and connecting with the community, those are your stakeholders. Those are, when we look at the organizational chart right at the beginning, they're the people that you are representing.
Sure.
And,
I think the only thing I would disagree with is, the administrators being in the room. I know, at least in my place of employment, my direct reports will have a much different conversation if I'm in the room versus if I'm not in the room.
I would agree.
And, right, and we do have opportunities also that we should be connecting with district leadership team if we're going to be connecting with the faculty separately. So, I mean, again, I think that, I don't disagree that there may be those feelings of distrust that are built. However, I also know that different conversations will happen depending on who's in there, in that room at that point in time.
But I do agree that administration should be part of like council meetings, and I think it develops more, they'll get to know you more, they'll understand your point. I think administration being part of those would be a key. I think it'd be very important to have them part of that.
Especially they're often asking questions about administrative stuff, and we
Yeah,
can help
we can't
support the
answer.
board and like relating some of that stuff.
Yeah, so, in either case, but it sounds like, we are gelling on this idea that maybe we might be too heavy internally looking versus externally
that's right.
looking.
And we should come up with some surefire way that we get a cross-section of town.
Yeah,
Not
and,
just-
and there are districts.
Surefire is tough.
Yeah, I mean, there are districts that do this well across the country. I'm thinking one in Colorado, if I remember correctly, has built a culture in their community where literally they've got, I can't remember how many linkages, but I know like they have one at 6 a.m. at a coffee shop to try to catch like the third shifters. They have another one that'll be offered around the noon time to capture other people who are available. And they'll have another one that's in the evening to capture a different cross-section. So they do have ways to do it. It's just a matter of what's going to work in La Crosse and our surrounding communities that make up the school district versus,
I think the point about building culture is, we can't expect, even if we come up with a great solution, it's gonna
It's gonna
take
take time.
time
It's
to
gonna
get
take
people
time.
to invest in it, and as new people come in, and hopefully you bring them right on board, that's all gonna take time. I
Yeah.
mean, that's,
Yep.
wrote a dissertation
But
about that.
I think in the meantime, we can start
Linkages.
getting feelers out, because there's gonna be a new mayor. You
Yep.
know that, right? So we can start getting feelers out to, the the visitor bureau, get a hold of some of them there at convention center, and we can start going out and tell them what we'd like to start doing, and they could start working on it prior to this and work with them, because I think it's,
Yeah.
I think it's important. You're right. I think
Yeah.
it's that part of it. PTOs from schools, start sending out information on that, because that's where you're gonna get the teachers that, I should say, the parents of the kids.
Absolutely. This is another thing that won't start until next year. We're wrapped up our linkage schedule.
Absolutely.
So I think in April, when we seat a new board, it might be a great time to throw out a new linkage schedule, and Laura has worked on that in the past. I think we can put together a draft of that and have it ready for April when we seat a new board.
Yeah.
So you'll have it ready Monday?
So is there anything that we want to continue discussing or schedule another time to discuss in regards to linkages? Or do we feel like waiting for the new board to get seated and starting that conversation then makes more sense?
Eventually, I'd like to actually, when I know that Tim had brought this up before, as we get results, it would be nice to have meetings on the linkages like right away.
What do you
No.
mean, meetings on the link?
Just talk about the outcome where,
What we heard.
what we heard.
Yeah.
Oh.
And more of a, like this type of format, when we can go through these,
It often comes up like at the end when there's like, is there any
Yes.
announcements people have? But it
Yeah.
could be an agenda item.
Yeah.
It used to be an agenda item back under policy governance, when I look back at the old agenda items. I think it may have been moved to consent because it was often not a lot of commentary and it almost felt performative, based on my listening to recordings back then too. So I think if folks want to talk about it, just put it on an agenda item, too easy.
Or also, everybody has the right to pull something from the consent agenda and have a
Yeah.
conversation.
Right, we can use the
Right, so
existing
we don't
mechanisms.
necessarily
Yes,
need
that's
an
true.
agenda item. If somebody wants to pull them, we can pull them and have the conversation at that point in time. Because there may be linkages where we don't have anything to say, there may be linkages where we have a lot to
So-
say.
Might
And
be
I feel like
sensitive.
Yeah,
Right,
That's
exactly.
why I'm wondering if we can't have more of this type of thing with the linkages where we can ask the difficult questions. It doesn't need to be, not everything needs to be such a public outcry of things. There might be sensitive stuff we want to talk about, and, that's why,
So-
because to his point, some of that we're gonna hear, every linkage is gonna be the same, where that's probably why it was put on the consent.
Yeah.
But there are areas where we would like to pull off and kind
well,
of talk
yeah,
about.
and what I would say to that is, it's kind of funny that you say that because that was part of the conversation about whether these workshops should be live or not.
Yeah,
Because when they're live, again, just like having an administrator in the room,
Right.
you're going to have different conversations than if they're not live, right? But everybody wanted transparency of the board, and so we all agreed that we were going to live stream these so that everybody can see what we're talking about. So in terms of having a more confidential conversation about things in the linkages, there's only certain things under state law that we can have that are confidential. Everything else must be public.
Right.
So in that regard, I think the only difference is, are you going to do it in a workshop or do you want to do it in the regular board meeting? But in the end, it's going to be public. So how do we want to, again, I think easy to just pull something off the consent agenda and have that robust conversation, because you can have it when you pull it off, or we can set a separate agenda item.
Is the linkages like 2 months? Well, I can't remember how long it's spread apart.
Takes us about 3 to 4 months, depending on the year, maybe a little longer, so there's like a season. It's the winter, late fall to
and
winter.
I mean,
Students are in the spring.
a workshop on the linkages after they've all concluded, where what we're talking about is how did the linkages as a
Yes.
system
Yeah.
go? That
Yes,
also
that makes,
seems useful.
that to me makes a
Yeah.
lot more sense, where at the end, we can also talk about like, did these questions work?
Right.
Maybe we have some different ideas for the next
Continual
iteration.
improvement,
Like,
that's right,
so I
yeah.
think that makes sense, but, if we want to talk about specifically about the linkage and the linkages that have occurred,
Right.
then we can do that at any point in time. If we have linkage notes and we just pull them off the consent, we have the conversation.
Yeah, I think the difference is between talking about what
What
is,
occurred.
what is the value of what the linkages are giving us as a board,
Yes.
and specific concerns that have come
Come
up
up.
within a particular linkage or
Absolutely.
linkages.
So, yeah,
And-
no, I do agree that, is that something the board is interested in doing? Again, between now and April. And, again, just like indicators, we're starting to add stuff, which is totally fine, but when do we want to do this? And what does the agenda allow us to do?
Right.
Right, so, I mean, if we want to do this in March, April?
I mean, I think a standing agenda item's not hard at
No.
all to have a linkage agenda item, and if there's.
Yeah, no, we're
if
talking
we don't-
about more the global.
That I would say March, you would
Yeah.
want to wrap up with this board,
Yes.
to
Ask
kind of
linkages,
review
what do
what's
we wanna
going on,
change?
Correct.
make
Set the structure
recommendations
for
for
what's-
the next board.
Yes.
And maybe it's all the same people, or maybe it's a few different,
Right.
but I think March is the perfect time to kind of have a wrap up.
Yeah.
We typically have the student linkages in April, and then district-wide parent is normally in May, so just keep that in consideration.
And we can shift those two.
In the future,
So
yeah.
that
We
makes
can
sense
shift
for
them.
March, to have a plan for the new board to say, this is what the structure of the linkages will be, this is what the questions will be,
Yeah.
so that.
And then when the new board gets seated, they could look at that and make adjustments as needed. But at least there would be a foundational creation of something
Lean
that
on
they
some
can work on.
expertise from a year's worth of working with it.
Exactly.
Right, and yeah, I was just thinking, I think you're anticipating it. You got new board members coming in, you're asking them to be like, all right, this is what you're gonna be doing for a year in terms of this process.
Mm-hmm.
Some folks might be like, I wanna pause and wait on that.
Or
Every
I
governing
completely-
body in the world, every elected body ties the hands of the group that
Correct.
comes after it, right? So
Right.
I'm okay with saying, like, we've been through this round of linkages, here are the kinds of changes we want to think about.
Here's our
Change
recommendations.
happens over time,
Yeah, here's
right? Yeah.
recommendations that we are giving to you, and now you do what you want with it.
Right.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what would be so vastly different, but.
Well, I think
Right.
what I've heard tonight is the questions are not the greatest, and we need to adjust those, right? And so at least one thing for sure, we will at least provide a recommendation to the new board that comes in. Yeah. Yep.
So, there are no perfect questions.
Right.
We all
I've
know
had
that.
discussions, I've been part of discussions for literally 20 years about how to write the right linkage questions, and we still haven't figured it out, but
Correct.
doesn't mean we should stop trying. So I just want to clarify, so we will still have on the consent agenda the linkage notes, and if we want to pull them off to acknowledge something, we can still do that. I like that opportunity because, again, I don't want to be, it would be inappropriate to say, well, I just don't know why administration can't do X, Y, or Z, and the staff are really upset about this, and why aren't you firing administrators, we have more teachers, like, that's totally inappropriate. But sometimes I think it's good to acknowledge, we heard X, Y, or Z, because these individuals took time out of their day that they didn't have to come to talk to us, and they did. And I think those are important things to say. And
I actually think it should just be on the agenda. I think it should be on the agenda, and we ought to at least brought it up that we heard. We don't need to get real deep into things. We can explain to them at the end of the year, we're gonna go all through all these, but I think it's important for them to hear that we heard them.
Acknowledge they
and-
were heard, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I laughed. I just, when you said get deep into things,
Oh, yeah,
we tend to do that.
yeah, oops.
We not always say that we heard them, but in some cases, a difference was made.
Yeah,
It's one thing to listen, another thing
yeah.
to do something.
So I think Deb, your point about perfect questions is well
Right,
made.
we all agree.
I think it also, it ties in with what Tim was very rightly saying, is that the framing of everything really impacts what you get as well. So
Correct.
I for one, I think I will come with like some suggested questions, right, or some framework for the questions, as well as the order of asking them, things, so,
Well, good luck on it.
in March.
And then you can do world peace. If you figure this out, I
Hey,
think
yeah.
world peace is right next on there.
Well, and you have,
Let's do it.
I mean, you have unique perspective as
Nobel
being
Peace
somebody
Prize.
that.
Yeah, I
does
feel
this
like
for a
I
living,
have
you know,
capacity for
yeah.
that, right? So, yeah, I'm happy to try. We'll see what happens.
What else do we need to discuss?
I know it's been longer than most people wanted to, but I think it's been very helpful, so thank you, everyone.
I love the workshops.
Yeah, me too.
I will say, again, it is public, it should be public, but having it a different night than our board meeting has created a casualness that I think has helped facilitate this.
I think we're usually all pretty tired after the board meeting.
I think that's the
Yeah.
challenge.
Yeah,
And so,
exactly.
I mean,
you know, we
this-
try to get into something and have a conversation, and it's just hard to stay focused.
Right, this started at the same time as our normal board meeting.
Yeah.
Where we have energy,
I'd agree.
right? And then, 2.5 hours in, we may not have that same energy. so-
And I think as we move down the line, maybe we want to look at that a little more, not have them at the same night as the board board meeting every time, because it does get to be long, and, and to your point, if we're adding things to the agenda, and then we cut people off because we got it to end before.
Right.
I've, obviously in the council, we've had meetings that have lasted after 10, 11 PM.
So,
But I think it's important, to be heard too, so.
In your
Absolutely.
passion.
I agree, I would add to that, though, just thinking from my own perspective, my family situation, work situation, everything, depending on who is elected as new board members, you might
Yeah.
have folks for like adding meetings on different nights and different nights and different nights. Like,
Yeah.
I'm committed to what the work is and being present for everything and whatever I can, but like,
I agree.
recognize that there are always gonna be limitations to what people can do.
Yeah.
so.
But maybe we don't need them both nights. I mean,
Right.
maybe we just have them one of the nights of our board meetings instead of both
Yeah,
on. And we, occasionally we do that,
Yeah.
and it's like a gift to us every time. We're like, wow, there's no, meeting afterwards. So maybe we can limit it to at least once a month.
I agree, because my concern would not be like, not having a linkage every day, or every meeting rather, but like, not having the sense that we're not having a discussion when it needs to be
Yeah.
had, right? Like, so our short meeting, their actual meeting went short the other night, and then the closed session on top of that. But I don't feel like there was something we should have filled that time with, right? So that's what I'm getting.
And
Yeah.
maybe it might be helpful to just plan an off-night workshop quarterly. Just
Yeah.
put it, get it on the calendar.
And if it's
If
far in
quarterly
advance.
isn't, I don't think burdensome to people, but if you get it on the calendar, I mean, if there is nothing, then we don't do it, but I think there's always something we could come up with, and if we do it quarterly, it could be, again, our workshops end up being so short because we're always out of time.
This might be so being in some of those breakout sessions, there's school boards that they'll have their normal meeting, and then the next will be a workshop meeting, and not have two board meetings. I don't know how they make that work, or if it's feasible, but
Smaller
just
districts.
throwing it out there, well, not really.
Cut down the
Some of them
indicators.
Yeah.
There's a lot of school boards that have 2 meetings a month. One is committee meeting night, and the other one's take care of business night.
Yeah.
Or it's workshop and professional development, and then the other one is business. It's incumbent then to like do the business quickly and not belabor it, and part of that's our monitoring reports, and we can talk about that. A lot of the other part of it is reading the stuff in advance and coming prepared to just ask your questions before you get to the meeting, and then just taking care of business when you're there. And right now, because we provide so much information, it's hard to look at it in the 4 days beforehand. So I recognize that as a difficulty, but there are ways around it. You know, there are some boards that put time limits on agenda items, knowing that we could talk about it all night, or we could just say it's gonna be 10 minutes and we're moving on.
Yeah, and some, like, the council, you had 3 times. You could talk about it 3 times and then you were done, you
Right,
know?
and that's been, at least in my presidency, in my perspective, I've never wanted to put a time limit, and I've never wanted to put limits on how many times a person could speak, because that's why we're here, right? And it is interesting to me, in the previous time I was president, we could get regular board meeting and workshop and closed session done in 3 hours, right? And so that's why I always say, like, you know, the meeting will take as long as we want it to. And so to your point of, have we said what we needed to say? Have we covered the agenda as we needed it to cover? Did we feel like we had enough? Did we miss something? You know, I think every individual will figure that out as they go. And every board has that opportunity at the beginning that they're just trying to get their feet under them, and then we find a groove, and then we start moving.
And don't take this the wrong way, but we obviously see different, you know, on a lot of things, and that's why it's taken longer.
Absolutely.
Where I think your former board, you were all pretty much, you know, on the
Absolutely.
same page.
And again, and that's,
Yeah.
that's the beauty of having different
Yeah.
boards, right? And the times, you know, politically as well
Things will
as
change.
just what's going on within the schools will also drive that.
Yeah.
So,
I
yeah.
agree.
I do have to share this because it was actually funny, and I'm only sharing it because it was funny. But there was a school district, I won't name the school district, but they had to have a workshop because they
Yeah.
were not disagreeing enough by the community's perspective.
Yeah,
They were passing things too easily
Yeah,
and
they're just
agreeing on
couldn't-
everything, which was
The
just,
public was
it was
just-
crazy
they were
to
scared,
to hear
yeah.
that, so.
Right, well, and I mean.
I'm glad that we have,
yeah.
But also on the flip side, like, that does happen.
it does.
Right? There are
Yeah.
things where we are okay, and even the community will come to us and say, well, why'd you just rubber stamp that? Well, technically, we actually did the work. We
Yeah.
did do the research, we just.
Well, Monday was one of those.
Right.
Monday was, I mean.
Right.
it's just-
Right.
And it's not, as long as we treat each other with respect, we can disagree all
Absolutely.
day long. I mean,
As long
you
as I
know.
know why you disagree.
Yeah, absolutely, you know, and it's not gonna stop, because we'll disagree
Yeah.
more down the road.
Absolutely.
But.
As we should.
I think, and
I
I
disagree
hope.
with that. I
that I hope everybody, I don't attack, I try not to attack people, and I understand we each have our own opinion, and that's the beauty of it,
And the
so.
sooner we get to know each other, the easier that all will be.
Yes, and
Yeah. I
that's
mean,
helpful,
Chris-
getting to know people.
Chris Clare was the board president for many years when I was on the board. I remember right when Act 10 was starting, and a bunch of teachers called in sick so they could go to the Capitol. And it was on a Thursday, because Friday was supposed to be off of school. And so Thursday, we would have sent home a grocery bag with a lot of the kids to get through the long weekend. And so we ended up closing school on Thursday because we didn't have enough staff here. They couldn't get enough subs to keep the school open. So we didn't have school that day. And so we had a lively discussion at the table about should the teachers get paid for that day or not. And Chris and I could not disagree more. In fact, the level of where Juan and I disagreed, we were at that level or worse. But Chris and I, she's one of my very best friends, and I'm one of her very best friends. And so the disagreement at the table doesn't, it's at the table and then you're done. And I think, I always enjoyed that, and I mean, to this day, Chris and I disagree, and it's so interesting, on Facebook, it looks like, how could we ever be friends? And we have so much more in common than we disagree with.
Yeah, I agree 100%. As long as you know why the person and not just push it off.
If you really want to get to know somebody, just go 6 hours in a car ride with somebody.
Is there a chance we can agree to adjourn?
I was gonna say, on that note, I think that's a positive note in which to say, let's get out of here. So, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Drive toward the center of the line.